It was just past midnight when I started my routine patrol. The roads were slick from a light rain, and the fog had rolled in thick enough that my headlights barely cut through it. Small towns like mine always look different at night. Empty streets, shuttered windows, the kind of silence that press against your chest. I tell myself it's just quiet, nothing more. But there's a weight to it that even years of patrol can't shake. That night, I felt it heavier than usual. I was driving down the old county road that winds past the outskirts of town. There's nothing out there, just trees, a few abandoned farmhouses, and stretches of black asphalt that seemed to stretch forever. My eyes were tired, and the hum of the engine was hypnotic. Then I saw her. She was standing by the side of the road, soaked through, shivering. Her coat was thin, barely shielding her from the rain. At first, I thought she was a local kid wandering home too late. But something about the way she stood there, arms crossed tightly, looking down at the road, made me hesitate. Her hair was plastered to her face, and she didn't move when I slowed down. I pulled over, and she finally looked up. Her eyes were wide, almost too wide, and caught the dull glow of my headlights. "Can you give me a ride?" she asked. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, but there was an edge of urgency underneath it. I nodded, keeping my hand on the door handle. "Sure," I said. "Where to?" She hesitated again, her eyes flicking toward the trees. Then back at me. "Just home, please." I opened the passenger door, and she got in. She didn't say anything else, just sat there, wet coat clinging to her, hands pressed to her lap. I started the car again, trying not to look at her too closely. She had that stillness that made the air feel colder, heavier. I kept checking the rear view mirror, half expecting her to vanish, though I told myself that was ridiculous. We drove for a few minutes in silence. The fog made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The rain pattered against the windshield, a constant, soft sound. I tried small talk, asked if she lived in town, what she was doing out here so late. She only shook her head, mumbling something I couldn't hear. Her presence was off, not threatening, not malicious, just wrong. I've been on the night shift for years. I've seen drunks, lost kids, people fleeing something they shouldn't. But there was a stillness to her, like she existed in a slightly different world than me. A mile down the road, I noticed something. Her shoes were wet, but the water on the road wasn't disturbed around her feet. I mean, there were no splashes, no puddle marks. It didn't make sense, but I didn't say anything. I tried to shake it from my mind. Maybe she stepped lightly. Maybe the rain had washed everything away. We continued. She didn't look at me, didn't look out the window. Occasionally, I'd glance over, and she'd be staring straight ahead, blank expression. I tried to read her, see if she was scared, tired, confused. But nothing. It was like looking at a doll. The silence grew heavier. My chest tightened. I started to wonder if I should have kept driving, not stopped. There's a part of me, the part that knows small towns too well, that whispered, maybe you shouldn't have picked her up, but I'm an officer. I don't leave people stranded. I know that. Finally, she spoke. "Turn here." She pointed to a narrow dirt road disappearing into the trees. It looked unused, overgrown, the kind of road that ended at an old farm, or maybe just dead-ended into the woods. I hesitated, looking at the map in my head. This road leads nowhere, I thought, but she kept her hand out, pressing down as if urging me. I turned. The tires crunched over the gravel, and the smell of wet leaves hit the car. The fog was thicker here, and the trees leaned close, like they were listening. I kept glancing in the rear view, and she didn't move, her eyes still fixed on the road ahead, unblinking. "Almost there?" I asked, my voice sounding strange even to me. "Yes," she said, and then, after a pause, almost whispering, "Please hurry." There's something about the word "please" that caught in my chest. It wasn't desperate in the way a normal person would be. It was solemn, heavy, like a warning. My hands tightened on the wheel. We drove in silence again. The fog seemed to thicken, the headlights struggling more with each passing foot of road. I tried to make small talk again, anything to break the tension. "It's a bad night to be out," I said. "Fog like this, easy to get lost." She didn't answer. I glanced at her again. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the dim light, and her hair was plastered to her cheeks. Her eyes caught mine for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, it felt like she was looking through me, seeing all the mistakes, all the regrets, everything I tried to forget. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. I focused on the road. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the fog behind her was shifting. Not the natural kind of movement from wind, but purposeful. Something else moving in the shadows. Something watching. I wanted to speak, to ask her if she was okay, but my voice caught. I realized I was gripping the wheel too tight. Knuckles white. My heart hammered. The sound of the wipers a poor defense against the sudden silence in the car. Then, just as suddenly, she turned her head slightly. Her lips moved, but the sound didn't come. I blinked, thinking I imagined it. The mist seemed to press closer to the car, a living thing curling around us. "Here," she said finally. She pointed to a small clearing. There was a lone house at the edge of the trees. It looked abandoned, broken windows, sagging roof, paint peeling. But the porch light flickered weakly. I stopped the car in front of the house. "Are you sure this is—" I started, but she was already stepping out. Her coat clung to her as she walked toward the house, leaving no wet footprint behind on the gravel. I leaned forward, straining to see, and that's when I noticed the details I should have seen before. Her eyes, when she looked back at me, were black, deep as the night, reflecting nothing. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. And her hand, the one waving at me goodbye, it wasn't really waving. It hovered, almost attached from her arm, like a shadow copying her movement. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and the house went silent. The porch light blinked once, then went out. I sat there for a long time, engine running, trying to process what I'd seen. When I finally looked at the road behind me, it was empty. No fog, no wet pavement, no sign she'd been there at all. Just a dark road stretching back toward town. I drove home slowly, my hands trembling, but I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see her walking after me, following silently, pleading for another ride. I don't know if I'll ever explain it. Some nights I tell myself I was tired, imagined it, fog messing with my eyes. But deep down, I know what I saw. And some nights, when the fog rolls in and the rain hits the pavement just right, I swear I can see her standing at the edge of the trees, waiting for the next patrol car. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon of gray, slick with rain and swallowed by fog. I kept the car moving, careful to stay under the speed limit, though I could feel my pulse speeding up with every glance at the passenger seat. She didn't say anything, not a word, not even when I tried. I started with small talk at first. "You been out long?" I asked, voice barely above the hum of tires. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound came. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd misheard, and tried again. "Cold night to be out walking, don't you think?" Still nothing. Her face stayed impassive, but I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Her eyes, they weren't right, not in a way you could immediately put into words. There was a depth to them, yes, but not the kind you see in living people. They didn't reflect the car's dim light properly, and when I looked too long, I felt like they weren't seeing me. They were watching something else, something far away. I tried to focus on the road. The fog pressed against the headlights, turning everything beyond 10 feet into a smear of gray. I thought about calling it in, maybe reporting a stranded person, but then I remembered that was a rule, right? Pick up anyone alone on a road like this. I've followed it for years. Never had a problem before. Not like this. I turned the radio on to fill the silence. Static hissed at first, and then the local station came through. They were reading traffic updates, the usual stuff, and then a report cut in that made my stomach drop. "We have a missing person alert tonight," the announcer said. 18-year-old female. Last seen walking near the county road outside Maplewood. She was wearing a thin coat, light-colored, and carrying nothing. Residents are asked to contact authorities if they see her. I swallowed hard. My eyes flicked to her. She hadn't moved, hadn't even blinked, but my heart raced. Her coat matched the description perfectly. And the timing, how could it be a coincidence? My hand tightened around the wheel. I tried to keep calm. It's just a kid, I told myself. Just a lost girl. I've seen this before. But the silence, her silence, especially after that report, made the car feel smaller, tighter. And those eyes, they didn't move when I glanced at them. She wasn't processing me. Not really. I asked her again, softer this time. Do you live around here? Nothing. I cleared my throat. Do you want to take you back to town? Or maybe the station? Still nothing. Her hands lay flat in her lap, but there was a stiffness to them. Too perfect, too symmetrical. It made me uneasy. The kind of uneasy that sits in your stomach and gnaws at you until your thoughts loop on themselves. The rain pattered steadily against the windshield, a constant sound that should have been calming. But it wasn't. Every tap sounded amplified, echoing inside the car, reminding me that I was alone with someone or something I didn't understand. I started thinking about the missing person alert again. The description, the age, the location. It was all lining up too perfectly. And the more I looked at her, the more I noticed little things. Her skin seemed almost pale in the dim light, like the kind of pale you see in a photograph of someone long gone. Her hair, plastered against her face, didn't move even when I glanced down the road where the wind had picked up slightly. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe she was in shock. Maybe she'd been walking for hours. Maybe she was hurt. Any of those made sense. But there was a deeper layer I couldn't shake, an unnatural quietness to her presence, a stillness that made the air around her feel cold. I tried to imagine her as normal, just a girl out late, lost in the fog. But my brain kept returning to the missing person alert, and the radio had said nothing about her yet, nothing official. But how could I ignore the coincidence? The fog grew denser as we drove. Trees pressed closer to the roadside, branches tapping against the car like skeletal fingers. I kept checking the rear view, half expecting to see someone or something following us, but there was nothing, just a swirling fog and my own reflection staring back at me. Almost there, I asked finally, my voice sounding strange, higher than I expected. She didn't respond, but then she moved slightly, just a shift in her posture, turning her head just a fraction toward me. And in that instant, I could have sworn her eyes glimmered, not like light reflecting off them, but like something inside them pulsed faintly. I jerked my eyes back to the road. My palms were sweaty on the wheel, though the air in the car was still cold, dry, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. I told myself I was imagining things. I always tell myself that, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. We passed an old intersection, the kind where the streetlights flicker or die completely. I glanced at her again, and I noticed a faint smile, barely perceptible, tugging at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't normal. And when I looked closer, the smile didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes stayed wide, unblinking, like windows into something hollow. I swallowed hard, trying to push the thought away. Keep driving. Just get her home. That's it. But even saying it in my head didn't make the tension go away. Every shadow outside seemed to move. Every rustle in the trees sounded like whispers. My hands tightened on the wheel again. I tried to focus on the radio, let the voice of the announcer guide my attention elsewhere. They were repeating the missing person alert, giving more details. They mentioned her name, Linda Harris. My stomach dropped at the familiarity, though I couldn't place why it sounded familiar. Maybe I'd heard it on some old patrol notes. Maybe the name was too ordinary to ignore. I kept glancing at her. Her lips twitched again, and her head turned just enough for me to catch a glimpse of her profile. Her eyes still hadn't followed mine. It was like she was looking past me, through me, at something else entirely. I realized my breathing had become shallow. The engine's hum sounded louder than it should, every raindrop like a drumbeat on my nerves. I tried to remind myself that I was trained for tense situations. I dealt with aggressive drunks, break-ins, even car accidents at midnight. But this was different. This was a quiet dread that didn't belong to anything I could explain. I told myself again, just get her home. Just get her home. The words felt hollow, even as I said them in my mind. And yet, the longer I drove, the more I noticed other small things. Her hands didn't twitch. didn't shift, didn't respond to the movement of the car. Her coat didn't appear to be wetting the seat, even though mine was damp from the fog windows. Small details, but enough to make my skin crawl. I tried talking again. We'll be there soon. Don't worry. My voice sounded weak even to me. Still nothing. I swallowed hard. The fog pressed closer, almost as if the night itself was watching. I tried not to think about how her description matched the missing person alert. I tried not to think about how unnatural she looked, how still she was. I tried not to think about the deep, hollow quality in her eyes that made me feel like I was being measured, like my entire life had been reduced to a few seconds under her gaze. We drove in silence for miles, or maybe it was minutes. Time felt wrong, stretched thin and fragile. The headlights barely pierced the fog. The trees bent closer to the road, shadows twisting unnaturally in the corner of my vision. I kept checking the mirrors, my pulse loud in my ears, and still, she didn't move. Finally, I took a turn toward a small residential road, one that led toward the outskirts of town. I hoped to see a familiar house, a porch light, something that made this all make sense. I caught sight of a faint glow up ahead, maybe a street lamp, maybe a house. It gave me hope, but also a creeping sense of dread. What if it wasn't her home? What if there was nowhere to go? I glanced at her again. Her head was turned slightly, almost as if she was acknowledging the approaching lights. But her eyes, they remained hollow, deep, impossible to read. I realized then that I wasn't just driving a car anymore. I was carrying a living question, something that didn't belong in the world I understood. The silence in the car became unbearable. I wanted her to speak, to break the spell. I wanted something, anything, that would tell me she was real, that she was alive, that I wasn't just hallucinating a phantom. But she remained quiet, staring straight ahead, unblinking, unmoving. The radio crackled again, repeating her description. The words seemed louder now, ringing in my head. Missing person. Female. Thin coat. Last seen walking near the county road. My stomach knotted tighter. And then, faintly, I thought I heard a whisper. Not from her, not from the radio, but from the space between them. Help me. I jerked in my seat, eyes darting to her. Nothing. Just a still girl. Hands resting in her lap, eyes unyielding. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. My mind playing tricks after hours on patrol. But I knew better. I always knew when something was wrong. And whatever this was, it wasn't going to be solved by rational thought alone. We drove on, deeper into the fog, deeper into the quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the world around us had shifted, that the night itself was different, and that I had brought along for the ride. I took the turn onto the familiar stretch of road, the one that loops past the old mill and curves around the hillside. I've driven it hundreds of times, even on nights thick with fog, even with the rain slicking the asphalt. I knew the rhythm of the road, the way the trees leaned in, the way the wind whistled through the cracks in the guardrails. But that night, everything felt off, as if the road itself had shifted in some subtle, wrong way. She said nothing as I turned, still staring straight ahead, hands folded neatly in her lap. I glanced at her reflexively, then quickly back at the road. There was a rhythm to her presence that made the car feel heavier, like she carried some invisible weight that pressed down on the entire vehicle. I rounded the bend, and that's when I noticed it. Her coat, her hands, her hair. Everything that had been in the passenger seat moments ago was gone. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. My chest tightened. I blinked, expecting to see her sitting there, eyes wide and unblinking. But she wasn't. The seat was empty. The damp coat I remembered resting neatly on her shoulders, now folded strangely on the floor mat. I swallowed hard. I must be hallucinating. This isn't real. Fog, tired eyes. Maybe I nodded off for a second. My fingers gripped the wheel tighter. The car hummed under me, steady and unchanging. But inside, my heart pounded like it was trying to escape my chest. And then I saw them. Her footprints, leading from the car into the fog. Wet, shiny, unmistakable. They stopped abruptly at the edge of the tree line, vanishing into nothing. No continuation into the darkness. No signs of where she might have gone. Just empty air and mist curling around the trees. I exhaled shakily. try and convince myself there was a rational explanation. Maybe she ducked out while I checked the dashboard. Maybe I had been distracted by the radio. But the footprints told a different story. They were too neat, too precise, and too immediately gone. I reached over, touching the passenger seat, half expecting her to somehow reappear, some trick of the fog or light. But the seat was cold and wet, empty. My mind raced. Did she step through the fog? Did she vanish somehow? The word sounded absurd, but nothing else fit. I forced myself to take a deep breath, steadying my shaking hands. I had to do the only thing I could think of. Check the road, look for clues, make sure she was all right. I swung the car around slowly, headlights cutting through the fog, scanning the tree-line, the gravel, the damp grass. Nothing, only the faint shimmer of water on the leaves. The way the fog seemed to press against the car like a living thing. I thought about calling it in, but even saying it in my head made my stomach twist. Missing person vanished into the fog on a patrol road. Who would believe that? Who could? The radio alert had already confirmed her existence. But I was the only one who'd seen her disappear. The only one who could swear she had been in the passenger seat seconds ago. The road stretched on, gray and twisting. I drove slowly, glancing at every shadow, every rustle of leaves. I thought about the missing person alert again. Linda Harris, 18, thin coat. Last seen walking near the county road. That was her. That had to be her. I could still picture her eyes, the hollow depth of them, the way they didn't reflect the car's light, the way she'd looked at me as if seeing something I could never understand. I could feel my pulse in my ears, the hum of the engine suddenly too loud, the wipers too slow. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow in the fog sharper. I reached for the radio, thinking maybe someone else could hear me. Maybe someone could explain what had just happened. But when I turned the dial, there was nothing but static. No traffic updates, no alerts, just a low, whispering hiss of white noise. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. Just drive. Keep driving. That was all I could think. But the road seemed to stretch endlessly now, unfamiliar in its familiarity. The curves didn't feel right. The trees seemed closer, the fog thicker. It was as if the turn I had taken, a road I knew by memory, was no longer the same. I remembered the footprints again, wet, dark against the gravel, disappearing into nothing. I reached over, touching the passenger side again, half expecting to feel something, anything, but there was only cold, damp emptiness. And that's when I realized the worst part. She hadn't just disappeared. She hadn't left in any way that made sense. The air itself seemed heavier where she'd been, like a shadow lingering long after the light had gone. I thought about the radio, the voice repeating her description earlier. The announcer had said nothing about a second disappearance, about vanishing into the night. But I knew what I'd seen. My mind tried to rationalize it, tried to say fatigue, exhaustion, fog, imagination. But deep down, I knew rationality wouldn't explain this. Not fully. The fog swirled closer to the car, pressing against the windshield like a living thing. My headlights caught glimpses of trees, twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like fingers. I could hear the rain tapping against the roof, each drop loud and distinct. But no other sounds, no movement, no voices, no sign of her beyond the footprints that had already disappeared. I forced myself to speak aloud. "Linda, are you there?" My voice sounded weak, thin, swallowed by the fog. No response. Of course there was no response. I didn't really expect one. But the act of saying her name, of calling into the fog, was the only tether I had left to reality. I tried to remember what I had learned in all those years on patrol. Always keep moving. Always keep your eyes open. Always record the details. My fingers tapped the dashboard as if taking notes, remembering the way her coat had clung, the hollow depth of her eyes, the impossible stillness of her hands. Each detail was burned into my mind, sharper than anything else I could recall. I drove slowly, scanning the fog, trying to make sense of the impossible. And then, just for a moment, I thought I saw her again, a shadow moving along the tree line, a flicker of light where the fog bent unnaturally. I blinked and it was gone. No footprints, no reflection, nothing. Just the road, fog, and my own breath fogging the windshield. Panic started to creep in, slow and insidious. I'd been trained for emergencies, for danger, for chaos. But this wasn't anything I could train for. This was something else. Something that didn't obey rules. Something that existed at the edge of what I could comprehend. I tried to rationalize again. Maybe she had slipped out while I adjusted the radio. Maybe she ran into the fog seeking shelter. But even the thought fell hollow. The footprints had stopped abruptly, right at the edge of the tree line. There was no path forward, no sign of her anywhere. Only the road stretching ahead, empty and gray. I kept driving, hoping, fearing that the road would return to normal, that I would round the next bend and see familiar signs, familiar houses, something that confirmed I hadn't lost my mind. But the fog remained thick, the trees leaning closer, the silence pressing against the car. It was as if the world itself had warped, shifting slightly, subtly, in response to her disappearance. I glanced at the seat again. Empty, cold, damp, unsettling in its completeness. The absence was more real than her presence had been, more oppressive, more palpable. I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for something that might never appear. I tried to focus on the road, on the familiar landmarks, on the hum of the engine, but my mind kept returning to the impossible. How could she vanish? How could someone be here 1 second and gone the next, leaving only wet footprints that end in nothing? The question looped in my head, a low, unrelenting hum of dread. I forced myself to take a deep breath, telling myself that patrol officers have seen strange things before. Unexplained disappearances, strange shadows, calls with no one on the line. But this felt different. Personal, close, like something was pressing against my perception, waiting for me to acknowledge it. The road twisted again. I squinted through the fog. I could see the faint outline of the tree line on either side, the slick asphalt under the headlights. And I realized I wasn't just looking for her anymore. I was looking for an explanation, some anchor to the world I thought I knew, some proof that what I had seen wasn't a figment of exhaustion or imagination. But there was nothing, only the disappearing road, the fading footprints, and a lingering sense of being watched. I pressed my foot harder on the accelerator, not recklessly, just enough to get past the bend ahead. Every turn, every shadow, every sound, or lack of sound, felt amplified, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I tried to convince myself. She's gone. She might be safe. She might have found shelter. Maybe I'll find her in the morning. But the emptiness in the passenger seat told me otherwise. The fog seemed to press closer, the night stretching longer, and I realized something I couldn't shake. Whatever had taken her, or whatever she had been, wasn't done. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me deeper than the night air ever could, that I had driven straight into it. I got home just after 2 a.m. The fog had followed me, thick and heavy, clinging to the edges of the street, like it had nowhere else to go. The town was silent. Shuttered houses lined up like shadows, and the occasional flicker of a street lamp cut through the mist with a weak, sickly light. I told myself I was imagining things, that the night had played tricks on me, that it had all been the fog, my imagination, exhaustion. But the air felt wrong, heavier than usual, and my skin was prickling. I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against it for a moment. My mind kept replaying the drive, the way she had disappeared, the footprints ending in nothing, the hollowness of her eyes. I tried to shake it, try to focus on the mundane, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the way the rain tapped against the window. But something in me refused to let go. I was about to set the coffee on and step into the shower when the phone rang. The sudden sound made my stomach drop. It was a sharp, insistent ring, cutting through the silence like a knife. I froze. The number was unrecognized, local, but unfamiliar. I picked it up, voice tight. "Hello?" A low, distorted whisper came through. Don't look outside." The line went dead before I could say anything. I blinked, holding the phone in my hand, trying to convince myself it had been a prank call. But the whisper lingered in my ears, slow and deliberate, like it had slithered into my mind. I told myself not to look. I tried to focus on the walls of my house, the familiar furniture, the dull hum of the lights. But I couldn't help it. My eyes drifted toward the window over the kitchen sink, and that's when I saw her. She was standing across the street, just at the edge of the fog, under the weak glow of a flickering street lamp. The rain had stopped, but the mist swirled around her, clinging to her coat. She didn't move. Not a step, not a blink, just standing there, staring. I could see her silhouette, slight and unnervingly still, the kind of still that made your stomach twist in knots. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look away. I told myself again, don't look, but my body betrayed me, eyes snapping back to her across the street. She hadn't moved an inch. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, like she was waiting for something, or maybe for me. I wanted to run outside, to confront her, to demand answers, but my legs wouldn't move. The whisper from the phone replayed in my mind. Don't look outside. It wasn't just a warning. It felt like a command, a rule I could sense but didn't fully understand. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, the kind I keep in my kitchen for power outages, and flicked it on. The beam cut through the fog, illuminating the empty street. There was nothing there. No figure. No coat. No hair plastered to a drenched face. No hollow eyes. Just a faint shimmer of wet asphalt and the fog curling in soft tendrils. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, convinced I was seeing things. My pulse thumped painfully in my chest. I tried to call the station, to hear a familiar voice, to find some anchor in the normal world. But my hands were shaking too badly to dial quickly. By the time I got the line connected, I was already scanning the window again, and then I saw her. She was back, standing in the exact same spot, exactly the same posture, not moving, not blinking, not breathing, as far as I could tell. The rain hadn't returned, but her coat was still damp, droplets clinging to the fabric. Her eyes, hollow and impossibly deep, met mine across the street. I could feel her gaze, sharp and unyielding, measuring me, pressing against my thoughts. I backed away from the window, heart hammering. I tried to convince myself that I was tired, that it was the fog, that it was the adrenaline from the earlier drive. But even as I said it, a part of me knew it wasn't imagination. Something was out there. Something was real. I grabbed my phone again, intending to call someone, anyone. The line rang, and when it connected, a voice whispered again. This time clearer, more deliberate. She's waiting. Don't step outside. I dropped the phone onto the counter, fumbling. My breath came fast, shallow, like I couldn't get enough air. I paced, trying to decide what to do. Lock the doors, sit in the dark, pretend it wasn't happening, or run. But there was nowhere to run. The street, the town, the fog, all of it felt wrong, like a trap. I returned to the window slowly, almost against my will. The fog shifted, and I thought she had moved. But no, she was still there, still standing, unmoving. I noticed something new then. Her shadow stretched long on the wet street, though there were no lights directly behind her. The shadow twisted slightly, unnaturally, curling and curling back toward the tree line, like it had a life of its own. I blinked, trying to clear my head. My rational mind fought against a creeping terror. It's a kid, waiting for help. Maybe she's lost, confused, scared. But my instinct screamed otherwise. Something about the way she stood, the way the fog curled around her, the unnatural stillness. It wasn't human. I remembered the footprints from the other night, disappearing into nothing. I remembered her hollow eyes, the strange glow beneath the street lamp, the way her presence made the air cold and heavy. And now, she was here, just across the street, silent, unmoving, impossible. I wanted to reach for my keys, to get back in the car, to leave, but my hands wouldn't move fast enough. I was frozen, anchored to the spot by a mix of fear, disbelief, and something deeper I couldn't name. Minutes passed. I don't know how many. The fog shifted slightly. The street lamp flickered. I tried to focus on anything ordinary. The hum of my refrigerator, the slight creak of my floorboards, the sound of the rain from earlier dripping off the gutters. But nothing felt real anymore. I thought about calling backup, maybe another officer to check the street. But the voice on the phone echoed in my mind, "Don't step outside." And I couldn't bring myself to move. I couldn't bring myself to even think of opening the door. Her eyes found mine again. That depth, that hollow intensity. I felt it tug at something inside me, a memory I couldn't place, a fear I had never known. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I was caught in her gaze, in that impossible stillness, in the thick, wet fog curling around the street. I remembered my training, my years on patrol. Trust your instincts, always stay aware, never underestimate a situation. But instincts weren't helping me now. Awareness didn't make sense of what I was seeing. Every rational thought was drowned out by the primal need to escape, to run, to hide. I sat down slowly, moving my chair back from the window, but I kept my eyes on her. Even seated, I felt the weight of her gaze pressing against me, bending the air, curling the fog around her. Time seemed to stretch, dragging minutes into hours. I thought I might go mad, but I couldn't look away entirely. Then I noticed something faint in the fog, a shimmer, a movement too precise, too controlled to be the wind, a figure, maybe more than one, shifting behind her, just out of focus, just beyond clarity. I blinked. It was gone. Only her remained, standing, waiting. I thought of the night before, the vanishing footprints, the impossible drive down the Fog County Road. Every memory came back in sharp, stabbing flashes. She had been in the car, then gone. The footprints ended in nothing. And now she was here, across the street, exactly the same, unmoving, impossible. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if leaving would make it worse, or if staying would. My mind circled endlessly, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. Every instinct screamed danger. Every logical thought insisted there was an explanation. And yet, the answer lay just out of reach, hidden in the fog, in her hollow eyes, in the wet street that reflected her impossible stillness. Hours could have passed. Minutes could have passed. I don't know. The world had narrowed to her, to the fog, to the weight of the silence pressing through the glass. And still, she didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak, just waited. A living question, a presence I could neither confront nor escape. Eventually, I found my phone again, and I sat in the dark, staring at the screen. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but the moment I reached for it, I felt it, like the fog had wrapped around me, like her gaze had slipped through the glass and curled around my chest. I froze. I realized then that I was trapped, not physically, but mentally, a silent, creeping trap that had been set when I stopped to pick her up, when I saw her vanish on the road, when I drove home and answered the phone. Every step had led to this. And across the street, she waited, waiting. The night shift had always been the easiest to hate and the hardest to respect. Empty streets, the occasional barking dog, the hum of the engine in my patrol car. Out here, time stretches, and your own thoughts start to echo. That's when you notice things you'd never see during the day. The shadows, the quiet corners, the places a fog likes to settle. Tonight, my route took me past the old Jensen barn. Nobody uses it anymore. The paint is peeling, the roof sags in the middle, and the boards across the windows rattle whenever the wind kicks up. Locals like to say it haunted, though most of the stories come from kids daring each other to get close or from old folks exaggerating over whiskey at the diner. I'd been driving past it for years, never paid much attention, until tonight. The fog had rolled in thick, the headlights barely cutting through it. I slowed as I approached the barn, more out of habit than caution. There was a stillness around the place, like it had been frozen for decades. I noticed the wind pushing the old boards, and for a moment, it sounded almost like a low, whispering moan. My stomach tightened. I shook my head, telling myself it was just the wind, just the barn settling, nothing more. I kept driving, but my eyes kept flicking to it. Every patrol on this road is supposed to be predictable, but there's a part of you that wants to look, to notice what isn't supposed to be there. And tonight I noticed. The first sound was subtle, almost too soft to pick up over the hum of the tires. A creak, then a faint tapping, like fingers drumming lightly on wood. I froze, hands tightening on the wheel, eyes scanning the barn. The fog made it impossible to see clearly. Maybe it was a branch tapping against the siding. Maybe a raccoon or a stray cat. My mind told me all sorts of explanations, But my instincts didn't listen. I slowed the car, shifting into first gear. The tapping grew slightly louder, more deliberate. It wasn't random. Not the wind, not an animal. It had a rhythm, uneven, almost hesitant. And then something moved, or I thought I saw movement, a shadow shifting behind one of the broken windows. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. My pulse thumped in my ears. I told myself to relax, that I was seeing things. The fog does strange things to the mind, plays tricks with the light and the shadows. That's what I kept telling myself. But then it came again, a low, scraping sound. Not from the roof, not from the boards, but from inside. The sound of something moving carefully, slowly, as if it was trying not to be noticed. My fingers tightened on the wheel, so hard I thought I might leave a mark. I remember thinking, do I stop? Do I call it in? Every training session, every seminar about situational awareness came rushing back. The Jensen barn is abandoned, yes, but that doesn't mean it's empty. Trespassers, squatters, sometimes drunks hiding out, even animals, though this didn't sound like any animal I knew. I considered it for a moment. Part of me wanted to stop, wanted to walk closer, check the place properly. But another part, the part that's been doing this job long enough to recognize when instinct screams danger, urged me forward. Keep moving. Don't let curiosity put you in a corner. I shifted back into drive and continued down the road. My eyes still flicked to the barn, though I tried not to stare. The fog swirled around it, giving it a strange, almost alive look. And then I heard it, the whisper. It was barely audible at first, like the edge of a thought or the tail end of a memory. A voice, soft, broken, almost pleading. My stomach dropped. Who's there? I muttered under my breath. My hands trembled slightly on the wheel. The voice didn't respond. Just that soft, faint murmur, curling and twisting with the fog. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, there was nothing. No shadow, no movement. Just the old barn sitting there in the fog like nothing had happened. I exhaled slowly, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. The night, the strange things, the fog, the isolation, the monotony of the patrol, they played tricks on your mind. That's all it was. That's what I told myself. I drove past, keeping a little extra distance. But every turn of the wheels made me glance back. There was a sense, almost a weight, that the barn was watching me. Not with eyes, obviously, but with something older, quieter, that made my chest tighten. The fog grew thicker as I moved on, swallowing the barn behind me. Headlights cut through only a few feet ahead. The hum of the engine was louder now. The tires on the wet asphalt a constant reminder that I was moving, leaving the place behind. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The whisper, faint though it was, had settled into my thoughts. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. It was probably the wind, a branch scraping the siding, my mind overreacting. But even as I reasoned with myself, I could still hear in my mind the low, broken murmur curling through the fog. I tried to think of something else, anything mundane, the radio, the next turn, the headlights of an oncoming car. But the fog seemed to press closer with every second, folding the night in on itself. The road stretched ahead, black and wet, familiar yet alien. I thought about calling it in, mentioning odd noises at the old barn. But what would I say? Sounded a ghost, I thought, and nearly laughed at myself. I'm a patrol officer, not some kid listening to horror stories. My rational mind fought the dread creeping along my spine. But rationality didn't ease the sensation of being watched. The prickling at the base of my neck that told me I wasn't alone, even in my car. I slowed at the next bend, heart still hammering. The fog shifted strangely around a cluster of trees near the barn, curling unnaturally. I swore I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving inside it, just for a moment. Then nothing, only the night wet asphalt and the low hum of my tires. I exhaled, gripping the wheel, and told myself again, just a barn, just fog, just a tired mind, nothing else. And yet, the hairs on my arms refused to lie down. Every instinct I had screamed that something had been inside there, or perhaps had been watching me outside. I shook my head, trying to laugh softly, though it came out uneven. The road stretched ahead, silent, empty, familiar. I turned the corner, and the barn was gone behind the fog. Only the wind whispered in my ears now, only the damp scent of rain, and old wood lingered in the air. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't left anything behind, that something, somewhere, had followed me just a little further down the road, that it had been waiting patient in the darkness beyond the fog, ready to make its presence known when I least expected it. By the time I finished the loop and returned to the main road, I kept glancing over my shoulder. Even though I knew there was nothing there, I didn't want to see anything. I didn't want to confirm the dread gnawing at me. But the night had a way of showing you things anyway. Small, subtle things that make the hair on your neck stand on end, that make the silence feel crowded, that make you question what's real and what's imagined. The rest of my shift passed uneventfully. Yet I couldn't shake the Jensen barn from my thoughts. Every turn, every stop, every silent street made me think of it. The sounds, the whispers, the impossible feeling that it had eyes, though I knew it didn't. Hours later, as I drove back to the station, I glanced at the fog in the distance, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a movement behind the old wooden walls, a shadow flickering where none should be. I blinked, and it was gone, but the feeling remained, that something in the barn had noticed me, had known I was there, and perhaps, somewhere deep in the shadows, it was still waiting, patient, silent, watching, and I knew, in that quiet, heavy night, that the Jensen barn would never be just an old, abandoned building again. Not for me, not after tonight. The Jensen barn had been on my mind all day, even in the daylight. It seemed to loom over the edge of the county road, sagging and silent, but with energy I couldn't place. Driving past it that morning, I felt the same pull I always did at night, the kind that makes your stomach tighten and your eyes linger on empty spaces a little too long. I told myself I'd just been tired the previous night, letting fog and shadows play tricks on me. But tonight, I had a feeling I wasn't imagining things. The streets were quiet. The town had long since gone to sleep, leaving only the hum of my patrol car and the occasional whistle of wind through the trees. I passed the usual houses, noting their darkened windows, the occasional flicker of a porch light, but all my attention kept returning to the barn, looming farther down the road, edges blurred in the mist that had rolled in with the evening. I slowed as I approached. The fog clung to the asphalt, curling around the tires as if it had its own mind. The barn was still there, dark, silent, peeling paint glistening faintly under the weak streetlights. And then I saw them, figures, shadows in the windows. At first, I thought it was a trick of fog, or maybe a branch pressed against the boards, distorting itself in the dim light. But no, there was movement, subtle but deliberate, shapes indistinct at first, shifting just enough to be noticed, standing in the broken windows, watching, waiting. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my breath. I've been on plenty of night patrols before, seen drunks, squatters, trespassers. I had even chased kids trying to prove their courage by creeping near abandoned buildings. But this wasn't like that. There was an intelligence to it, a stillness in the figures that made them unnervingly patient. I slowed my car to a crawl, eyes fixed on the barn. I could make out more than two, maybe three shadows moving behind the boards. Their motions were subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to catch my peripheral vision. Every instinct I had screamed at me, "Don't stop, keep moving." But something, a morbid curiosity, a need to understand, drove me to park at the edge of the gravel drive. The mist curled around the car as I stepped out, my boots crunch against the wet gravel, the sound echoing unnaturally in the heavy air. I tried calling out, "Hello? Anyone in there?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the night and fog. The shadows in the windows didn't respond. They just stayed, watching, silent and unreadable. I circled the car cautiously, keeping my hand on my flashlight. The closer I got, the more details I noticed. The barn boards were warped and cracked, the windows broken but framed with jagged edges. Behind them, the shadows moved as if shifting from one pane to another. But every time I focused on one, it seemed to dissolve into darkness. It was impossible to tell how many there were, or if they were even human. I reached the barn doors, the old wood cold under my hand. I could feel the dampness, the age, the decay, and then I noticed something faint. Wet footprints leading from the doors to the side of the building. They were too small to be mine, too precise to belong to an animal, and they stopped abruptly, leading nowhere. I forced myself to take a deep breath. It's just a barn. Empty. You've seen things before. Don't let your mind play tricks. But my heart was hammering, my ears straining against the heavy silence. The fog pressed closer, curling around my legs in the barn like it had life. I pushed the doors open slowly. The hinges creaked under the strain, a loud, groaning protest that seemed louder than it should have been in the still night. The interior was dark, almost pitch black, the weak light from the windows unable to penetrate the corners. I raised my flashlight and swept it across the space. Nothing. No figures. No shadows. No footprints beyond what I had already seen outside. The hay was damp and rotting, the wooden beams sagging and warped. Every sound I made, my breathing, the click of the flashlight, the faint scuff of my boots, echoed strangely, as if the barn itself were amplifying them. I stepped further inside, shining the beam into every corner. Cobwebs swayed slightly as I passed, though there was no wind. I could see the old tools hanging on the walls, the rusted buckets and broken barrels. But no figures, no shapes, nothing that could have cast the shadows I'd seen in windows. And yet, the feeling remained. Heavy, cold, watching. I couldn't shake it. The air felt different, thick and tense, like the building itself was holding its breath. I backed out slowly, keeping my eyes on the windows. The shadows were gone. Every pane reflected only the fog outside, twisting the weak light into strange, shifting shapes. I shook my head, telling myself I must have been mistaken. Fog, tired eyes, just fog. But even saying it didn't ease the chill crawling up my spine. As I stepped out, the barn doors slammed shut behind me with a force that rattled my chest. No wind, no explanation, just a heavy, echoing thud that left my ears ringing. I froze, flashlight shaking slightly in my hands. I checked the doors. They were firmly closed. No figures inside. No sign of anyone moving within. Just the old wood and the darkness. I took a step back, heart hammering. The fog swirled thicker around me, and I could feel the weight of the night pressing against my shoulders. It wasn't just the cold or the mist. It was something more. Something deliberate, patient, aware. I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe the figures were trick-of-light illusions, shadows from trees, branches, fog curling in odd shapes. Maybe the barn had some uneven surfaces reflecting my flashlight. Maybe I'd been overworked, tired from the night shift, letting my imagination run wild. But every instinct in my body, every hair standing on end, told me that explanation wasn't enough. I circled the barn slowly, shining my flashlight along the walls. Nothing. Every window was empty, every corner dark. And yet, the memory of those figures lingered, like a stain I couldn't scrub away. I could still feel their gaze, impossible as it was, pressing against me from the darkness beyond the glass. The fog thickened further as I returned to my patrol car. My boots left small prints in the damp gravel, and I noticed the air had gone unnaturally still. The wind I'd felt earlier had died completely, leaving only the weight of silence. I climbed back into the car, heart still racing, hands gripping the wheel. I started the engine, the hum louder than usual, comforting only in its familiarity. I glanced back once more at the barn. It sat there inert, quiet, almost mundane under the streetlight. No shadows, no movements, nothing to indicate what had just happened. And yet, the memory of those figures in the windows remained like an imprint in my mind. Driving away, I tried to focus on the familiar road ahead, the streetlights, the occasional house, the dull hum of the engine. But the feeling followed me, creeping along the edges of my thoughts. Every time I thought I had left it behind, the shapes, the shadows, the impossible movement of those figures returned. I thought about calling it in. Maybe another officer could check the barn, confirm I hadn't gone mad. But how could I explain it? Saw shadows in the windows of an abandoned barn at night. Doors slammed shut. Nobody there. It sounded insane, even to me, and yet the memory pressed against me, more tangible than any explanation I could offer. I could still see the silhouettes, shifting just enough to remind me they had been there, waiting, observing, silent and patient. By the time I returned to the main road, the fog had lifted slightly, revealing a familiar path back to town. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those shapes following me, half hoping I wouldn't. But there was nothing, only the night stretching behind me, empty and quiet. Still, I knew it wasn't over. The barn had left a mark on the night, and I could feel it in my chest, in the tightness of my shoulders, in the cold twist of dread that followed every turn of the patrol car. Something had been there. Something had watched, and I had no idea what it wanted or why it hadn't left me alone in the darkness. I drove on, trying to convince myself that morning light would make it all seem less real. But even in the bright memory of my own bed, I knew the shapes lingered, waiting, silent, patient, and the Jensen barn would never be just an abandoned building again. Not for me. Not ever. The Jensen barn had been on my mind ever since the night before. Even driving past it during the day, with the sun washing over the peeling paint and sagging roof, I could feel the weight of it. Something about the place didn't belong in the ordinary world. It pressed in, subtle but undeniable, like a shadow brushing against your shoulder without touching. I decided to check it out again. I told myself it was routine, part of my patrol. Maybe a stray cat or a raccoon had taken up residence, or a kid had snuck inside for a dare. Rational explanations, ones I desperately clung to, were supposed to calm the creeping dread. But when I drove up the gravel path, the barn looming before me in silence, I couldn't shake the unease. The air smelled older, heavier, like the night had seeped into the wood and dust and stayed there. The doors were still shut tight from the previous night, the hinges stiff with moisture and age. I parked my patrol car a few feet away and stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel. I raised my flashlight and pointed it at the entrance. The beam cut to the dim interior, bouncing off the dust in the air. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, flickers, shadows that vanished when I focused on them. I forced myself to take a deep breath and pushed the doors open slowly. The hinges groaned under my hand, loud in the stillness. Inside, the barn smelled of rot, old hay, and something else, something metallic, faint but unmistakable. My boots stirred the dust on the floor, sending small clouds into the air. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were small, neat, and wet in the dust, as if someone had walked through a damp patch before entering. The strange part was where they led, or rather, where they didn't lead. They started at the old wooden doors and stretched across the floorboards, perfectly clear, but then stopped abruptly in the middle of the barn. No continuation, no sign of where the person, or whatever it was, had gone. It was impossible. I knelt down, shining my flashlight over prints, trying to make sense of them. The edges were crisp, pressed into the dust with an unnatural precision. Not human, not animal. My pulse quickened. I felt that familiar, suffocating weight of being watched, though I was alone. My flashlight trembled slightly in my hands. The barn was silent except for the creak of the roof and the soft whine of wind through the cracks. I spoke aloud, trying to anchor myself to reality. "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice sounded weak, swallowed by the space. No response, just the dust, the shadows, the lingering echo of footprints that went nowhere. I straightened and swept the flashlight across the walls. And that's when I saw them. Symbols. Strange. Twisted. Smeared onto the boards with what looked like charcoal or soot. I could see the faint smudges in the dust coating the walls, etched in patterns I couldn't recognize. Circles, lines, shapes that felt wrong, uncomfortable. My stomach tightened. I stepped closer, leaning over to examine them. The marks were sharp, deliberate. Someone, or something, had taken care to leave them. They weren't random scratches or damage from age. They were meant to be seen, and more importantly, to be remembered. I swallowed hard and ran my hand over one of the symbols. The dust flaked off, but the grooves beneath felt smooth, as if polished. I couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it, and yet part of me knew the markings weren't meant for me alone. They carried intent, a presence that lingered long after whoever or whatever had made them had gone. I moved around the barn carefully, flashlight scanning every corner. More footprints appeared in the dust, leading from one set of walls to another, but every trail ended abruptly. No pattern, no exits. They were trapped in the space, like someone had walked through it and then simply vanished. The symbols shifted as I moved, or maybe it was my mind playing tricks. Lines that seemed straight when viewed from one angle curved unnaturally when seen from another. Circles overlapped in ways that made no sense. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I could feel the barn pressing closer, the shadows curling toward me from the corners, teasing the edge of my vision. I stepped back and shook my head. I had to remind myself I wasn't imagining it. I was trained for uncertainty, for strange and dangerous situations. But this was different. It didn't feel like danger in the traditional sense. It felt older, patient, deliberate. It felt like the building itself was alive and aware of me, observing every step, every movement, every thought. I moved toward the back of the barn, shining the light across the floor. More footprints. They stopped just short of the hayloft ladder, leaving the boards in between perfectly undisturbed. I climbed the ladder cautiously, each step groaning under my weight. At the top, the loft was empty except for dust and old hay bales. Nothing had disturbed it, and yet I could feel it. Something had been here, something that left its imprint without ever being seen. I exhaled slowly and leaned against the railing, trying to steady my shaking hands. The symbols on the walls below seemed to pulse in the flashlight's beam, twisting subtly as if alive. I shook my head again. I had to get a grip. It was dust, old wood, shadows. That was all. That was all it could be. And yet, the footprints. They led everywhere, nowhere, and back again. It was impossible. My mind struggled to reconcile what I saw with what I knew was real. But rational thought felt hollow. My heartbeat echoed through the barn louder than the creaking roof or the whisper of the wind. I remembered the previous night. The shadows in the windows, the sudden slam of the doors. Every memory pressed against me now, sharpening the sense of unease. Something was using the space, something patient, something aware, and I was intruding. I stepped down carefully, flashlight sweeping. The symbols became clearer. Circles, triangles, lines intersecting in ways that didn't belong in any geometry I had learned. They were crooked in subtle ways, unsettling to the eye, like looking at a room through a warped lens. I couldn't read them, couldn't understand them, but I felt them in my chest, a slow, heavy thrum of dread. I backed toward the entrance, glancing down at the footprints one last time. They ended abruptly at the old doorframe, just beyond the threshold. My breath came fast and shallow. I wanted to call it in, to tell someone, to verify that I wasn't losing my mind. But the barn was quiet, still, indifferent. It wouldn't offer any answers, only more questions, more unease. I stepped outside and exhaled. The fog had thickened again, curling around the barn in soft, gray tendrils. My boots left marks in gravel, but I could feel the air itself press closer, like it knew I had seen too much. I climbed back into the patrol car, heartbeat echoing in my ears. I could still see the symbols in my mind, the footprints that led nowhere, the unsettling stillness of the space. Driving away, I kept looking in the rear-view mirror. The barn sat there, inert yet alive in some strange, impossible way. The fog swirled around it, shadows bending against the weak light. The imprint of whatever had been inside lingered, invisible but tangible, like a weight pressing against my thoughts. I tried to tell myself I'd imagine it. That morning light would make the barn seem ordinary again. But even as the town lights came into view, even as I rounded the familiar bends toward home, I couldn't shake it. The footprints, the symbols, the sense that someone or something had moved through that space with intent, leaving only questions and the whisper of its presence behind. At home, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, the footprint in the dust, the strange shapes etched into the walls, twisting and impossible. The barn had left a mark, one that didn't fade with daylight, and I knew, deep down, that it wasn't done. It wouldn't be satisfied with just one observation, one intrusion. I kept glancing toward the window, half expecting to see a shadow move outside, some impossible echo of what I had seen. The memory of the footprints leading nowhere pressed against me, insistent, like a heartbeat I could not escape. And I understood then, fully and without doubt, that the Jensen barn had a life of its own, not the life of animals, not the life of wind or rot, but something older, patient, and aware, something that left traces of itself in dust, in shadows, in symbols no one could read, without fear pressing against their chest. I knew I would go back. I knew I would check again, because part of me needed to understand, even as the rest of me screamed to stay away. The footprints in the dust, the symbols on the walls, the way the shadows moved. They were all a message, a warning I couldn't yet comprehend. And yet, some part of me, the reckless, cursed part, wanted to see it again, because the Jensen barn had already reached into my mind, and I was not the kind of person to let it go. The night was heavy, thick with fog that seemed to swallow the patrol car whole. I had hoped that after the previous night, after the barn, I could treat this as a normal shift, just another loop through quiet streets, checking empty houses and darkened lanes. But something had changed. The Jensen barn had left its mark, and I could feel it settling into my thoughts, curling into the edges of my mind. I kept my hands on the wheel, knuckles tight, the headlights barely cut through the gray mist. The radio was off. I didn't want any distraction. The town was silent except for the hum of the engine and the occasional creak of a sign swinging in the wind. And then I heard it, a whisper, soft, faint, almost too distant to catch. My pulse jumped. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint it. It came again, clearer this time, curling through the fog like a snake. A single name, whispered just under my consciousness. Tommy. I froze, grip tightening on the wheel. Tommy, one of the children who had gone missing last month. I remembered the posters on the lampposts, the town meetings, the hollow look in parents' eyes when they asked about progress. I told myself it was my imagination, some trick of the fog, the fatigue of long night patrols. Then the whispers grew, names faint but distinct. Lily, Marcus, Jenny, each carried the weight of absence, of something wrong, something lost. My chest tightened, breath catching in my throat. I rolled down the window slightly, trying to hear better, trying to convince myself it was wind or distant voices. But no wind carried the words that clearly echoed through the night. I pressed the accelerator lightly, telling myself to move forward, to shake it off. The fog clung to the asphalt, curling around the tires. Every shadow seemed alive, bending in the corners of my eyes. I kept glancing in the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see another patrol car or a neighbor's light. But the streets were empty. Only the whispering names followed me, and then I saw the figures. At first, I thought they were shadows, tricks of the fog reflecting the dim glow of streetlights. But they moved too deliberately, slender shapes, indistinct but humanoid, keeping pace at the edge of the fog. I blinked and they vanished. But every time I slowed, every time I turned a corner, they returned, just glimpses, just enough to catch the corner of my eye, enough to make my stomach twist. I told myself to ignore them. Rational thought, training, experience. It all demanded that I dismiss these things as fatigue or fog playing tricks. But instinct screamed otherwise. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, matching the rhythm of my tires on wet asphalt. I tried calling it in, speaking into the radio. Control, do you copy? I'm seeing. My voice faltered, choked on the words. When I glanced up, a figure stood briefly in the middle of the road, a child-sized silhouette, pale and still, watching. I slammed the brakes instinctively, tires skidding slightly on wet pavement. And then it was gone. No one there. No fog shift. Just the empty road, slick and black, reflecting my headlights. My hands were trembling now. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white. My mind raced. Exhaustion, stress, fog. That's all it could be. It had to be. But the whispers didn't stop. Tommy, Lily, Marcus. Names curling around my skull, insistent, demanding. Each carried a note of longing, of warning, of something I couldn't understand. I felt as if the air itself were pressing into my chest, heavy with memory and absence. I slowed at the next intersection, gripping the wheel, scanning the sides of the road. That's when I saw them again. Figures in the fog. Just glimpses this time. Standing behind a row of trees. Moving just enough to be noticed, but never approaching. Watching. Waiting. The fog shifted, curling around them, giving them a presence I couldn't rationalize. I tried talking to myself, whispering to break the spell. It's nothing. It's fog, shadow, fatigue. My own voice sounded foreign in the enclosed cab of the car, but even as I repeated it, I felt the weight of eyes on me. Every turn, every quiet lane seemed to stretch. Shadows stretched unnaturally, and the fog moved as if it had a mind. And the whispers, they weren't always from ahead or behind. Sometimes I could hear them in the passenger seat, faint, almost intimate, curling around me like a voice in the room. Tommy, Lily, Jenny, I could feel my heartbeat in my temples, each pulse echoing in the still night. My hand shook on the wheel. Rationality fought with instinct. Everything in me screamed to flee, to escape the streets, the fog, the voices. But something held me there, curiosity, stubbornness, the feeling that if I turn away, I'd be leaving something unfinished, something important. I took a deep breath and forced my eyes to the fog, searching for any shape that might explain what I was seeing. But there was nothing human, nothing tangible. Just silhouettes, half glimpsed, moving at the edge of awareness, whispering names that made my chest ache with unexplainable grief. The fog thinned slightly near the old mill, and I thought I had a moment of clarity. I blinked, and a figure appeared at the edge of the road. A girl, maybe 10, standing in the mist, dress plastered her skin from rain, hair dark and wet, face pale. Her eyes were hollow, staring, and when she whispered my name, my real name, my blood ran cold. I slammed my hands on the wheel, willing myself to move. I drove past, headlights sweeping the road, checking mirrors, scanning every tree line, every shadow. But she vanished. Only the whisper remained, echoing through the fog, weaving into my thoughts. Every corner, every lane, every empty street held her presence, or their presence. The children lost, missing, never found. Now, for some impossible reason, they were here, speaking to me, pressing against my mind, and I couldn't escape it. I pulled over briefly at a side road, heart hammering, chest tight. The fog wrapped around the patrol car like a living thing. I told myself to breathe, to remember training, to rationalize. But rational thought didn't hold. The whispers were constant, insistent, curling around me like smoke. I thought back to the Jensen barn, the footprints, the symbols, that same impossibility, the same awareness, the same patient observation. Everything connected, but I couldn't make sense of it. The fog, the shadows, the names, it all seemed deliberate, orchestrated, a warning or perhaps a test. I glanced in the rear-view mirror again. A figure stood behind a chain-link fence, obscured by fog. It looked human, but something about it twisted the mind. Impossible proportions, elongated limbs that vanished and reappeared with a blink. Its eyes caught the light, hollow and accusing, and then it moved, following me. I gripped the wheel tighter. Stay calm, I whispered to myself. Rational, trained, focused. But fear gnawed at my stomach. Every instinct screamed that the figures weren't just hallucinations, that the whispers weren't just echoes of missing children. Something real, patient, and deliberate was out there, and it had taken notice of me. I kept driving, scanning every dark corner, every fog-laden street, every shadow that moved at the edge of vision. Every time I blinked, I caught them again, standing, watching, whispering. Their names, their absence, pressed against my thoughts, curling into nightmares I couldn't escape. By the time I returned to the station, my hands were trembling, sweat cold on my skin. I didn't speak to anyone. I just sat in the car a moment longer, staring out the fog creeping over the asphalt, wondering how many of those whispers had been real, and how many had been the barn reaching through the night into my mind. I drove home slowly, keeping headlights low, watching the edges of the road. And even then, I felt them, small, shadowy forms that seemed to follow just out of focus, whispering names that carved into my chest. Tommy, Lily, Marcus, Jenny. I told myself again. They were gone. The night is long. the fog plays tricks. But deep down, I knew that the Jensen barn, the footprints, the symbols, and now the whispers, they were all pieces of the same impossible puzzle. Something patient, something aware, something that wanted me to see, to remember, to feel its presence. And as I finally closed my front door behind me, I knew the voices would follow, curling around my mind, lingering in the shadows of every quiet room, waiting for the next patrol, the next fog, the next impossible night. I drove past the Jensen barn in the middle of the afternoon, the air thick with the acrid scent of smoke that clung to the back roads like a warning. The call had come through on dispatch just as I was finishing my lunch break. Old Jensen barn is fully engulfed. I tried to steady my breath as I drove faster, the patrol car's tires crunching over gravel and scattered debris. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I had a bad feeling that seeing the place in flames would not be the end of the story. When I arrived, the barn was barely recognizable. Flames licked at the remaining beams, smoke curling high into the gray sky. Fire trucks had arrived, sprinklers hissing and water striking the wood with a loud crack. The air was heavy with heat, choking, and full of that sharp smell of burning timber and something else, something acrid and organic that made my stomach twist. I got out of my car, helmet unfastened, hands trembling despite telling myself I had seen worse. The firefighters were efficient, shouting orders and dousing the fire wherever they could, but the core of the barn, the heart of it, was already gone. Blackened timber stood like jagged teeth, shadows curling inside them as smoke poured out. I couldn't take my eyes off it, drawn in despite, every instinct screaming at me to leave. I stepped closer, keeping my distance from the flames, scanning the charred interior. And then I saw it, a small shape, clearly human-sized, lying in the ashes. At first, I thought it might be a melted doll, some grotesque toy left behind. But the outline was unmistakable. A child, lying on its back, arms outstretched, pressed into floors as the fire had burned around it, but never touched it completely. My stomach lurched. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself it was a trick of light and ash, a warped shadow in the smoke. But the outline was too precise, too human. I forced myself to kneel at a safe distance, flashlight in hand despite the bright daylight, and fire engines flashing around me. The outline didn't move, didn't react, but it seemed impossibly present. There was no mistaking it. The shape of a small body burned into the memory of the barn. My hands shook, and I tried not to look too closely, to rationalize it as some strange effect of fire on the timbers. But my rational mind had nothing for this. I heard the whispers again, soft, faint, curling through my ears even over the hiss of the sprinklers and the crackle of what's still burning. My name, my real name, whispered with an urgency that pressed into my skull. I froze, heart hammering. It wasn't coming from the barn, not entirely. It was in my head, echoing, weaving into my thoughts like smoke curling around the corners of my mind. Tommy, Lily, Marcus, officer. I stumbled back, blinking, forcing myself to breathe. Fire and shadow and memory tangled together, and I felt my chest tighten in that familiar, suffocating way. I couldn't run, couldn't look away. The outline of the child in the ashes had something in it, some impossible presence that clung to me, and the whispers, relentless and impossible, followed me as I stepped back to the patrol car. The rest of the shift blurred. I stayed close to the scene, watching as the barn collapsed further under the fire's assault. Each beam that fell, each plume of smoke that rose, seemed to carry a weight beyond the physical. It wasn't just destruction. It was a release, a message, a warning. And through it all, the whispers persisted, curling into the edges of my mind until I could feel them even when I closed my eyes. I returned home later that evening, exhausted but unable to shake the feeling that something had followed me. The barn was gone, nothing left but ash and scorched earth, and yet I could still feel it in my chest. The whispers were quieter now, but no less insistent, curling through my thoughts even as I tried to eat, shower, and sleep. By the time I turned off the lights and lay in bed, I could hear them clearly, unmistakable. Soft voices calling my name, pressing against my mind. Officer, you saw, you know. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to force sleep, but every corner of the room seemed to shift in the dim moonlight filtering through my blinds. Shadows curled unnaturally, forming shapes I couldn't quite name, moving just at the edge of perception. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, that the fire, the fog, the past nights, all of it was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. Hours later, I awoke to a cold draft in my bedroom. The window was closed, curtains pulled tight, yet the air felt alive, moving against my skin. And then I saw it, a shadow at the far end of the room, small, child-sized, standing perfectly still. I froze, staring, unable to breathe. It was gone a moment later, vanished as if it had never been there. But the whispers didn't stop. "Officer, do you see? Do you hear? Do you remember?" I bolted upright, sweating, heart hammering, trying to shake it off. My eyes darted around the room, searching every corner, every shadow. Nothing, only the dim glow of the streetlights outside. I told myself it was a hallucination, the aftermath of too many nights on patrol, too many encounters with fog, darkness, and the unknown. But I knew the truth. I had seen something. Something that fire could not destroy, that ash could not bury. The outline of the child, the whispers, the presence. They were still there, pressing against me, impossible to ignore. I tried to sleep again, lying on my side, head buried under the pillow. The whispers became fragments, disjointed phrases I could barely understand. Follow, remember, watch, don't leave. I wanted to cover my ears, to scream, to run. But I was trapped under my own skin, hearing what should not be heard, seeing what should not be seen. The next day, I returned to the site briefly, under the sun, hoping to ground myself in reality. All that remained of the barn was blackened earth and scorched timbers. No outline of the child remained, no evidence of the whispers, nothing to prove the impossible things I had experienced. I walked the perimeter slowly, boots crunching over ash and debris, trying to rationalize, try to find anything that would let me believe it was all in my head. But I found nothing, and yet the sensation of presence, the memory of those whispers, followed me as I drove back home. Every tree, every shadow, every curve of the road seemed to hum with the memory of the barn. My chest tightened, my pulse raced, and when I arrived home, I could hear them again, soft, insistent, whisper my name, curling around the furniture, pressing against the walls. I tried everything to block it, music, television, lights on, but the voices only adapted, moving closer, inside my thoughts, inside my skull. I could feel them there even as I moved, even as I tried to eat or shower. I couldn't escape. By nightfall, I had given up. I lay on my bed, lights dimmed, and listened. The whispers grew louder in the quiet room, curling into my mind with impossible clarity. "Officer, watch! Do not forget, we are here." Sleep came in fragmented bursts, haunted by shadows, by echoes of movement, by the impossible outline of a child in ash. I dreamed of small hands reaching through smoke, faces twisting in shadow, eyes that were hollow but aware. I awoke, drenched in sweat, unable to tell where the dream ended and the waking world began. Days passed. I returned to patrol, drove the same roads, checked familiar houses and streets. But nothing was normal anymore. The barn was gone, yes, but its memory, its presence, lingered. The whispers followed me even in daylight, faint but insistent, pressing against my thoughts. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision, figures I couldn't identify, shapes that vanished when I blinked. And every night when I returned home, I could hear them clearly, softly whisper my name, reminding me that what had been burned was never gone. The child-shaped outline, the echoes of missing voices, the impossible awareness. The Jensen barn had left its mark, and it followed me into the sanctuary of my own house. I know I should try to report it, to rationalize, to ignore, but I can't. The whispers are patient, deliberate, impossible to escape. I can feel them curling through my mind even now, pressing against my skull, waiting for me to understand, to see, to remember. And I know, deep down, that this is only the beginning. The fire may have consumed the barn, but it has not consumed what lived there, what watched, what whispered. And as long as I hear those names, I will never be free. The night was thick with fog again, the kind that makes every streetlight blurry and every shadow feel alive. I was on my usual patrol route, the roads empty, the town silent. The hum of the patrol car and the occasional rustle wind through the trees were the only sounds. I had been on nights like this countless times, but tonight felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting. The radio crackled suddenly, sharp enough to make me jerk. I reached over, fingers fumbled with the dials, expecting a routine call from dispatch. But this wasn't dispatch. The sound was distorted, buried under static, yet familiar. Someone or something was speaking. I leaned closer. The voice was faint but unmistakable. It whispered my name. Officer, officer. I froze, heart thumping. The name wasn't being called over the normal channels. It didn't feel like a mistake. It felt deliberate, personal. I adjusted the volume, trying to make sense of it, and the voice repeated itself, a fractured echo under layers of static. Officer, officer. My hands tightened on the wheel. I scanned the nearby forest that ran along the road. The trees were dark, thick, and unbroken by any clearings. No headlights, no cars, no people, just a fog curling between trunks like smoke from a fire that never existed. Yet the voice continued, repeating, insistent, impossible. I pressed the mic, trying to call back. This is Unit 3-2. Who's this? Repeat, over. The static hissed and crackled, and for a moment I thought I heard a whisper of my own voice coming back. It wasn't dispatch. It wasn't anyone I knew. The sound was warped, impossible, distorted. Yet unmistakably it was calling me. I slowed the patrol car, peering into the fog along the edge of the trees. My flashlight cut a narrow beam into the darkness, but there was nothing, only the hush of the forest, the curl of fog, and the whisper of static repeating my name. Officer, officer. I forced myself to rationalize. Equipment malfunction, interference, maybe some prank. Though I knew no one in this town had the skill to pull this off. Maybe it was fatigue, my mind inventing voices after nights of empty roads and isolation. But instinct, that raw, stubborn instinct that never lies, told me otherwise. Something was out there. Something was aware of me. I drove a few yards further, trying to stay calm. The voice didn't change, didn't hesitate. It repeated my name over and over, warped by static but unmistakable. I swallowed hard. Each repetition pressed against my chest, tight, impossible to ignore. I felt my hands shake on the wheel. I tried moving away from the forest, thinking if I left the area, the sound would disappear. But the radio carried it still. No matter which channel I tried, the same warped whisper returned, insistent, deliberate. Officer, officer. My mind raced. I remembered nights before, fog rolling in, shadows flicking in the corner of my vision, the Jensen barn, the footprints in dust, the burn outline, memories pressing against my skull like a vice. And now this, the forest, alive with static voices calling my name. I could feel it curling around me, moving through the car, pressing against my thoughts. I glanced at the tree line again. Shapes flickered just beyond the fog, indistinct but humanoid, moving slowly, patiently. Each time I tried to focus, the shapes vanished, leaving only fog and static. My name whispered in warped tones. I pulled over, heart hammering, and grabbed the radio again. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. I stammered, unsure what to say. The static hissed, the whisper repeated, and then it shifted slightly, almost conversational. Officer, come closer, we're waiting. I froze. My chest tightened and sweat prickled at my temples. That was impossible. It wasn't a normal transmission. There was intent in the sound, intelligence behind it, a patient and deliberate waiting that made my skin crawl. I wanted to leave, to drive straight back to town, to ignore whatever was out there, but I couldn't. Some part of me, the part that had walked into the Jensen barn, that had watched footprints vanish in dust, that had heard the whispers of my own home, knew I couldn't just escape. I had been chosen or noticed, and whatever was out there wasn't finished. I rolled the window down, letting the damp, fog-heavy air swirl into the car. The voice continued, now clearer, as if moving closer, shaping itself against the hiss of static. My own name, repeated again and again, wrapped in layers of something unhuman, curling to my ears and into my mind. I want to call for backup, but my radio only carried the same static-filled whisper. I tried turning off, unplugging it, anything to silence the impossible sound, but it persisted, as if the sound wasn't coming from the device at all, but from somewhere else, somewhere just beyond sight, hidden in the fog, carried on the night itself. I felt a presence then, heavy and patient, moving alongside the patrol car through the fog, not visible at first, just a subtle pressure at the edges of perception, a sensation of being watched with impossibly careful attention. Every instinct I had screamed to flee, to escape, but the forest pressed closer, folding around the car, closing off the roads, and the voice whispered, guiding me, "Officer, come closer, come see." I swallowed hard and gripped the wheel. Fog whipped across the windshield, twisting into shapes that made my stomach turn. Shadows flitted at the edges of my vision. I blinked and the shapes were gone, but the voice, my name, warped, insistent, continued, never tiring, never stopping. I remembered the burned barn, the outline, the whispers of my home, all the impossible things I had seen, all the impossibilities that pressed against my mind night after night. And I understood something I hadn't fully admitted before. I was being drawn in, not by choice, not by curiosity, but by something deliberate, patient, and aware, something that wanted me. I kept driving slowly, scanning the tree line, the fog, the empty road. Every so often, a flicker, just a corner of something humanoid, a movement too precise to be random. I felt it watching, learning, waiting, and every time I blinked, the whisper carried on. "Officer, follow, come closer, don't look away." Hours seemed to stretch unnaturally. The fog thickened, bending the familiar roads into something alien, impossible. The forest pressed against me on either side, dark and unbroken, alive with static and intent. The voice repeated my name with insistence, curling into my mind with every pulse of the engine. Finally, I reached a small clearing in the road. The fog hung thick, and the forest seemed impossibly deep, black as night, stretching into infinity. I stopped the car, hand trembling on the wheel, flashlight sweeping, eyes straining. The radio crackled one last time, louder, insistent. "Officer, we know, come closer." I closed my eyes for a moment, shaking, heart racing. Rational thoughts screamed at me to turn back, to flee, to call someone. But instinct, deep and stubborn, held me there. The Jensen barn, the footprints in dust, the burned outline. They had all led here, and I knew it. Whatever was out there, calling, waiting, whispering my name, it had been following me, guiding me, shaping the night around me. The fog seemed to shift, curling into shapes that were almost human, almost real. I could feel the weight of eyes, the patient gaze of something impossible, just beyond vision, waiting. And then the voice, my name, warped, distorted, insistent, reached into my chest, pressing against my heartbeat, embedding itself into memory. I started the car again, slowly, keeping eyes on the edges of clearing. The radio crackled one final time, repeating my name as the fog twisted and shifted, hiding and revealing shapes that should not exist. And even as I drove back to familiar roads, to the town lights, to the comfort houses and street lamps, I knew the voice had not left. It would follow, waiting in the static, waiting in the fog, waiting in the dark the next patrol, the next lonely night, the next impossible moment when it could call my name again. The forest road had narrowed so much that the patrol car's tires crunched over loose gravel and fallen branches, the fog closing in around me like a living wall. I had followed the radio's voice earlier, that warped static whisper calling my name, and it led me here, deeper than I had ever patrolled, past the familiar bends and streetlights into territory that felt forgotten. The air was different here, heavier, damp with rot and the smell of moss and wet leaves, and beneath it all, a faint metallic tang I couldn't place. It wasn't just a forest. It felt aware, as if the trees themselves were watching, leaning closer in silence, waiting for me to notice. I kept my eyes on the narrow path ahead, flashlight cutting through the fog, trying to convince myself that I wasn't being drawn somewhere dangerous. The voice had gone quiet now, but I could feel its echo in the air, a residue of presence that pressed against my mind. I stepped out of the car carefully, boots sinking into the soft mud. The trees arched overhead, thick with mist, and in that low, gray light, I could see the remnants of something human. A campsite, old fire pits, stone stacked neatly in rings, ash cold and scattered. Canvas remnants, blackened and torn, fluttering in the occasional gust of wind. A few rusted cans lay half buried in the mud. Nothing alive, nothing breathing, and yet signs of recent activity. The fire pits were disturbed as if someone had been here recently, and faint footprints pressed into the mud, leading further into the trees. I swallowed hard, heart thumping. The rational part of me insisted it was abandoned campers, teenagers playing a prank, hikers passing through. But instinct, stubborn, raw, and undeniable, told me otherwise. These weren't old tracks. Someone had been here recently, and the silence, the weight of the fog, the unnatural stillness of the forest. It didn't feel like an accident. I followed the footprints slowly, each step careful, alert. The trees close in, shadows curling like fingers around me. Every snapping twig under my boots made my pulse spike. The mist seemed to thicken as I went deeper, wrapping around me, damp and heavy, blurring the world. I reached another campsite, smaller this time, a tarp tied between two trees, sagging under the weight of rain and fog, and beneath it, the impression of someone sleeping, but no one was there. I shone the flashlight around, scanning the perimeter. Nothing, no movement, no sound except the soft whisper of the wind through the branches. And yet, something felt off. Too off. The footprints led past the tarp, deeper into the trees. And then I saw it. Another sign of life. A small pile of clothes, neatly folded, resting atop a flat rock. The fabric was damp, pressed into the moss, but freshly so. Someone had been here. Someone had moved carefully, deliberately, leaving nothing behind but this quiet, unsettling proof of presence. I crouched, brushing my fingers over the wet fabric. My stomach churned. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, that the forest itself had eyes trained on me. I whispered to myself, trying to rationalize. It's just hikers, just campers, someone left in a hurry. But the voice in my head, the lingering echo of the radio whisper, told me otherwise. This wasn't normal. This wasn't a mistake. I followed the trail further, heart hammering, the footprints twisted, crossing over themselves, fading into shallow depressions in the moss. I stopped, shining the flashlight over the ground. For a moment, I thought I'd lost them, and then I noticed the signs. Slight depressions where someone had knelt, smudges in the mud, small scratch marks on tree trunks. The forest was littered with traces of presence, but no people. Every so often, I heard a sound, not footsteps, but faint, almost imperceptible, a snapping twig, a rustle of leaves, like someone shifting just out of sight. I spun the flashlight around, searching the foggy underbrush, but there was nothing, just the trees, their twisted trunks casting long shadows that seemed to lean in to watch. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Rational thought, training, experience, they demanded I stay calm. But the hair on the back of my neck was on end. Every instinct screamed that I was being led somewhere, that someone or something was watching me, guiding me along this trail of absence and half-seen signs. I reached the clearing finally. Sunlight, weak and pale, filtered through the mist, illuminating another campsite. This one was different. Fresh footprints led up to a tree and then vanished completely. The mud was disturbed, flattened in a perfect circle, as if someone had been standing there, then simply disappeared. I felt my stomach lurch. I bent close to the ground, shining the flashlight over the earth. There were faint drag marks, shallow, almost imperceptible, as if something had been pulled away, leaving the ground scarred but empty. A shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself had shifted, that the clearing had been altered in my absence, that I was walking in a space that wasn't quite real, or at least not entirely fixed in the same way as the world outside. I whispered to myself again, it's nothing, just tracks, just mud, just trees. But the voice in the radio, the echo that followed me here, whispered back. I couldn't hear it with my ears this time. It was inside my skull, curling into my thoughts. Follow, follow, we are here. I took another step, and a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. I turned quickly. Nothing, just the fog, the trees, the gray, pale light filtering through leaves. but the feeling of presence, that impossibly patient awareness, pressed against me. It was there, just beyond sight, patient, deliberate. I pressed on, following the trail through the trees, following faint hints of recent activity. A flattened patch of moss, a branch bent unnaturally, a leaf scraped along the ground as if someone had moved through it with care. And always the voice, soft, insistent, impossible, curling through my thoughts. We are here, we see, follow. Hours seemed to stretch unnaturally. The sun fell lower, light dimming, fog thickening. Each step became heavier, each breath tighter in my chest. The footprints never ended. They twisted, faded, returned in patterns that made no sense, like the forest was rearranging itself, leaving me signs meant to be seen but impossible to understand. And then I saw a movement, just a flicker, a peripheral shift. Something crouched behind a tree, small, impossibly still. I froze, heart hammering, hand tightening on the flashlight. The shadow didn't move, didn't blink, didn't make a sound. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. The footprints ended at the edge of a small clearing, grass flattened, earth disturbed. But there was no one there, nothing living, just the traces of presence, the echoes of movement, and the lingering sense that I had been watched the entire way. I knelt, shining the flashlight over the ground, inspecting the tracks, faint drag marks, impressions of small feet, circles where someone had knelt, but no sign of life. I felt my chest tighten. The forest was empty, yet full, as if it remembered something I could not see, something impossible, patient, deliberate. I forced myself to stand, breathing hard. Every step I took back toward the patrol car felt heavier, as if the forest was pressing against me, pushing me along, guiding me with invisible hands. The radio in the car crackled faintly, not with my name this time, but with a static hum that felt alive, vibrating against my skull. I tried to shut off, but the hum persisted, as if coming from everywhere at once. By the time I reached the car, the last rays of sunlight had disappeared. Fog rolled in thick and fast, curling around the vehicle, hiding the road. I gripped the wheel, staring into the gray whiteness, feeling impossibly small in the immensity of the forest. The traces of recent life, the footprints that led nowhere, the empty clearings. They weren't signs of abandonment. They were signs of awareness, signs that I had been noticed, followed, and observed. I started the engine, trying to convince myself that this was over, that I was leaving behind whatever had guided me here. But as I drove slowly back to familiar roads, the echo of footsteps, the rustle of leaves, the impossible traces of movement haunted my vision. The forest seemed to shift, bending the roads I thought I knew, hiding familiar landmarks, creating a labyrinth of absence and memory. And somewhere in the depths of the fog, in the spaces between the trees, I could feel it waiting, patient, aware, watching. The footprints, the campsites, the traces of life that vanished. They were not abandoned. They were signals, invitations, warnings. And I could not shake the sense that I had answered them simply by stepping into the forest, by noticing, by following. I drove on, headlights cutting narrow beams of fog, following the curve of familiar streets that suddenly felt alien. I told myself to ignore it, to put the memory of the missing trail behind me. But deep down, I knew it was not over. I could still feel the forest pressing, still hear the faint echo of movement, still imagine small figures crouched just beyond sight, watching. By the time I returned to the town, the night had fallen fully. Streetlights flickered, houses slept, and the quiet streets seemed to mock the emptiness I had witnessed. But in the silence, I could still feel the presence of the missing trail, the echo of life that had been here, that was gone, yet never truly gone. I parked, stepping out of the car, shaking, chest tight, mind racing. The forest was behind me, but its weight had not lifted. And as I locked the doors, I realized the traces of life, the footprints, the flattened clearings, the whispers in the radio, the impossible awareness would follow me, not in form, not in substance, but in memory, in fear, in the creeping knowledge that some things notice, some things wait, and some things never truly disappear. The deeper I went into the forest, the heavier the air felt. Fog curled around the trees like slow-moving smoke, and every step I took seemed to press against it, making the path narrower, the shadows deeper. The radio had gone silent, but the memory of the voice lingered, echoing faintly in my mind. My name, repeated, warped, insistent. It had guided me this far, and I knew instinctively it hadn't finished. I gripped the flashlight tighter, the beam cutting through the mist in narrow slices. Every tree I passed seemed impossibly tall. Their branches tangled like reaching fingers above my head. The forest was alive in a way that made my skin crawl. The faint rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig underfoot, the whisper of wind that sounded almost like movement, almost like breathing. I told myself it was just the forest, just the wind, but my instinct screamed that I was being watched. And then I saw it. Eyes, peering from between the trees, glinting faintly in the diffuse light. Not animals. Too still, too precise. They blinked once and disappeared, leaving only the fog and the shifting shadows. My pulse quickened, and I spun the flashlight toward the spot. Nothing, only the tree trunks, gray and wet, and the curling fog between them. I tried to rationalize. Maybe a deer, maybe a raccoon. But the movement, the way the eyes had followed me, deliberate, unhurried, wasn't animal. It was something else, something patient, something aware. I forced myself to move forward, keeping my flashlight trained on the edges of the trees. Every few steps, I caught a glimpse of them again. Two dark eyes peering from behind a trunk, a pale shape crouched in shadow, disappearing when I blinked. I felt my chest tighten. The forest wasn't just watching. It was playing with me, testing me, guiding me. Branches snagged at my jacket as I passed, and the fog seemed to thicken, pressing into my face. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I raised it again. The eyes returned, flickering, shifting. I thought I saw small figures moving just out of reach, weaving through the trees, always careful to remain unseen, always aware. I stopped heart hammering and scanned the area slowly, deliberately. The forest stretched in all directions, uniform and unbroken, yet impossible patterns seemed to emerge. Shadows leaned closer when I wasn't looking directly at them, and the glimpses of figures never stayed in one place. Every time I thought I had pinpointed them, they were gone. I whispered to myself, try to maintain some thread of rational thought. It's just shadows. It's just fog. Nothing here can see you. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't random. The footprints, the abandoned campsites, the static on the radio, they were all signs. Signs of awareness. Signs that something or someone was observing, guiding, waiting. I moved cautiously, following the faint impressions of footprints in the damp moss. They were shallow, almost imperceptible, but they carried me further into the forest, and the eyes followed. Not always in the same spot, not always in the same form, but always present, shifting, patient. They were in the trees, behind the brush, in the fog itself. I could feel them watching from angles I hadn't thought to check, their gaze pressing against me like a weight on my back. The further I went, the more the forest felt unnatural. The trees twisted in ways that made no sense, branches arched too high or too low, gaps in the fog that seemed deliberate, as if the forest was shaping itself around me. I felt dizzy, as if the ground beneath my feet was subtly moving, rearranging itself while I wasn't looking. Every instinct told me to turn back, but the same instinct that had guided me this far insisted I go forward. Then I saw a movement that didn't belong. A figure, just beyond the beam of my flashlight, crouched low, almost blending with the moss-covered earth. It didn't run. It didn't move erratically. It simply watched. I froze. My heart felt like it was hammering in my throat. The figure had no face, at least none I could see, just a dark shape, too still, too deliberate. I raised my flashlight fully, and when the beam struck it, the figure vanished. Not like it ran or turned away. It was gone, as if the forest had swallowed it whole. I swallowed hard, gripping the flashlight until my knuckles ached. My mind raced. The footsteps, the missing campsites, the traces of life that vanished. They weren't just signs of presence. They were indicators of something impossible, something patient, something that could hide in plain sight. I pressed on, every step deliberate, my senses straining. The fog shifted with me, curling around my legs, brushing my face. The air smelled damp and earthy, with something faintly metallic beneath it. And always, in the corner of my mind, the echo of the voice from the radio. My name, warped and insistent. Not loud, not commanding, but impossible to ignore. Officer, follow. See, I reached a small clearing, and the trees opened just enough for me to glimpse the sky. The fog clung low to ground, curling around the roots and moss, but there was no wind. And there, at the edges of the clearing, eyes stared. A dozen, maybe more, scattered among the trunks and branches. They didn't blink, didn't move in the way animals do. They simply observed, waiting, patient, deliberate. I felt a cold sweat break along my back. The eyes were everywhere now, and I couldn't see how many there were. Shapes moved just beyond sight, shifting in and out of fog. Small glimpses of pale faces, shadowed forms crouching, observing. The forest was alive with presence, with awareness, with something that should not exist in the ordinary world. I tried to call into the night, my voice trembling. Who's there? Show yourself. My words seemed to vanish immediately into the fog, swallowed whole. The forest didn't respond. It simply remained, silent, watching. The eyes blinked once, slowly, deliberately, then vanished again. I felt my stomach twist, a deep, crawling dread that coiled through my chest. The forest wasn't just a place. It was a trap, a mechanism of observation, and I was the only thing moving in it that was not part of its unnatural order. Every instinct screamed to run, to flee, to abandon reason entirely. But the same instinct that had driven me this far refused to let me go. Something in me demanded I see it, understand it, witness it. Branches snagged my jacket again as I moved forward, and I realized I was trembling, not just from fear, but from the sheer impossibility of what I was seeing. The forest was not empty. It never had been. The campsites, the footprints, the traces of life. They were indicators, signs of a presence that moved beyond perception, hiding in plain sight, waiting for those who dare to notice. I stopped again, breathing hard, scanning the foggy trees. Shadows shifted, but never fully revealed themselves. The eyes returned here and there, flickers of awareness, moving with impossible precision. I realized with a cold knot in my stomach that the forest was conscious, or at least something in it was. Something patient, something that could manipulate light, shadow, and perception to hide its true form. I whispered to myself, trying to hold on to rational thought, trying to ground myself. You're tired. You're imagining it. It's just the fog, just the trees, just the night. But deep down, I knew better. The eyes didn't belong to fog, to trees, to night. They belonged to something impossible, patient, aware, something that had been guiding me, shaping the trail, testing me. I continued through the clearing, every step slow, deliberate, careful. The fog curled around my boots, curling into small eddies as I moved, and the eyes followed, always, shifting from one tree to the next, disappearing when I looked directly, only to reappear moments later in impossible places. I felt watched in a way that left no part of me untouched. Every thought, every movement, every blink was observed. The voice on the radio, long silent, returned faintly, echoing inside my mind. You see, you follow, you know, we wait. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The forest had become an entity, a presence. The missing trails, the abandoned campsites, the footprints that led nowhere. They were all part of it, clues for me to follow, to understand, to witness. And I realized that witnessing was exactly what it wanted. Observation, attention, fear. I pressed on, following the trail deeper into the mist, aware now that the eyes were not just around me. They were above me, below me, embedded in the shadows, lurking in the folds of fog. And as I moved, I felt the patience behind them, deliberate, infinite knowing. I was no longer walking through a forest. I was walking through awareness itself, and the forest was alive with it. By the time I emerged on the far edge of the clearing, my flashlight trembling in my hands, my chest tight, I understood something fundamental. Whatever followed me, whatever hid in plain sight, was not leaving. Not tonight, not ever. It was patient. It was deliberate, and it had eyes everywhere. And I could feel them watching still. The night was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that bites the fabric of your uniform and presses itself into your bones. The patrol car's heater was working overtime, but even with it cranked to full, I could feel the chill settling into my chest. I was driving past the lake again, frozen solid beneath the thin layer of ice, the surface reflecting the moonlight in dull, gray patches. The town had warned people not to venture out here this time of year, but that didn't stop me from making the rounds. I kept my eyes on the road, tires crunching over the frozen gravel along the lakeshore. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own breathing sound loud, intrusive. No wind, no animals, no sound except the engine hum and the distant scrape of ice shifting under its own weight. I had passed this lake countless times before, and every patrol had been the same. Frozen stillness, a blanket of snow along the trees, no one around for miles. But tonight, something felt off. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, the moonlight catching on the ice in unusual ways. But then I saw it, a figure, walking on the ice. It was impossible. The temperature had dipped well below freezing for weeks, and the lake was supposedly solid, thick with ice. Yet there was a person, or something like one, moving slowly across the frozen surface. At first, I thought it might be someone fishing illegally, a local kid trying to sneak out onto the ice. But there was no equipment, no glow of a lantern, nothing that suggested a normal human presence. Just a silhouette, pale and unnaturally still, gliding over the ice in a way that seemed deliberate and measured. I slowed the car, heart thumping. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. Something about the way the figure moved didn't make sense. It wasn't stumbling, slipping, or testing the ice. It moved confidently, with a steady rhythm, as though it knew the ice better than anyone could. And yet, it wasn't normal. The proportions felt off. Too tall, too elongated, shadows stretching strangely across the frozen surface. I leaned closer to the windshield, trying to get a better look. The figure didn't acknowledge me. It didn't look up, didn't pause. It simply continued across the ice, unwavering, precise. My chest tightened. Rational thought tried to remind me. Maybe it was a reflection, a trick of the moonlight on uneven ice. But my instincts told me otherwise. This was real. It was there. And it was impossible. I reached for the radio, fingers trembling. Dispatch, do you copy? I think someone's on the lake. Over. Static hissed back, and the voice of dispatch was calm. Routine. Unit 2-3, we copy. What's your location? Over. I gave them coordinates, but the cold made my teeth chatter and my voice uneven. As I spoke, the figure continued across the ice, a silent silhouette in the moonlight. I could see the surface shift beneath its steps, ice cracking faintly, tiny spiderweb lines radiating outward. But the figure didn't falter. Not a pause, not a stumble, just steady, impossibly confident movement. I considered leaving, driving past as if I hadn't seen anything. But something rooted me in place, a mix of dread and curiosity. The same feeling I had experienced on nights with the Jensen barn, the empty campsites, the footprints in dust. I wanted to understand, to see it, to make sense of what shouldn't be possible. The figure was closer now, still across the ice but moving toward the opposite shore. I noticed details that made my stomach twist. The legs were slightly too long, the arms hanging in a way that didn't feel natural, and a head too small, or maybe the proportions were wrong under the moonlight. It wasn't human, or at least not in any sense I could understand. I grabbed the binoculars from the passenger seat, my hands shaking, bringing them up to my eyes. I focused on the figure. The ice beneath it glinted faintly, cracks forming, spreading, but it moved without hesitation. I could see the way it shifted its weight, slow, deliberate, precise, and then, for the first time, it turned its head, or I thought it did. I froze. The face, it didn't have one, not in the way a human face should. Shadows pooled where features should be, twisting in subtle ways that made my stomach knot. I lowered the binoculars, hands trembling. This was impossible. And yet, it existed, crossing the lake without fear, without concern, as though the cold and the ice and the night itself were obedient to it. The wind picked up low and mournful, carrying the faint sound of cracking ice and distant tree limbs creaking. The figure didn't react. It continued across the lake, a ghostly silhouette against the pale reflection of the moon. My pulse raced, and my chest ached with a mix of fear and fascination. I couldn't look away, couldn't want my feet to move, couldn't convince myself to drive away. I reached for the radio again, fingers numb. Dispatch, I'm still at the lake. There's something here. I don't know what it is. Over. Static hissed. No response. I tried again. The voice was gone. The signal weak, faint, like the world itself was swallowing it. My pulse quickened. Alone now. I felt the weight of the night pressing down, the cold pressing into my skin, the impossible figure still crossing the lake. I considered turning on the siren, flashing the lights, trying to scare it, to see what it would do. But a deep, instinctive fear held me back. This wasn't something that reacted to normal human presence. It existed beyond rules, beyond expectations. I had no idea what it wanted, if it even had intent, and the thought of drawing attention to myself filled me with unease. The figure reached the opposite shore. For a moment, I thought it would vanish, that it would step into the trees and be gone, but it didn't. It paused at the edge, where the ice met the snow-covered bank. I could see its form more clearly now, distorted, elongated, impossibly still. And then, without warning, it was gone, not stepping into the trees, not moving to conceal itself. Simply gone, as if it had never existed. I sat in the car, heartbeat loud in my ears, staring at the place where it had been. The ice was empty, silent, unbroken now except for faint spiderweb cracks that had formed as it passed. My rational mind struggled to make sense of it. Maybe a trick of the ice, a hallucination from the cold, exhaustion, but every instinct told me otherwise. This had been real. I had seen it, and whatever it was impossible. I stayed there for a long time, engine running, heater blasting, staring at the frozen lake. I thought about calling backup, about driving around the lake, about searching for footprints or signs. But there was nothing. No footprints, no drag marks, no evidence that anyone or anything had crossed the ice. Only the lingering sense of presence, heavy and patient, pressing against the edges of my mind. Eventually, I started the car again, moving slowly down the road that skirted the lake. The figure didn't reappear. The ice remained silent. The fog pressed against the patrol car, dense and white, curling over the hood, hiding everything beyond a few feet. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, just beyond the veil of visibility, watching, waiting, aware. Back in the town, the streets were empty, quiet in the way they always were at night. Lights glimmered in houses, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying nothing but the cold. But I knew the lake was still out there, still frozen, still waiting. And I knew, because I could feel it, because I had experienced it, that whatever crossed the ice tonight was not gone. It existed somewhere between the frost and the fog, patient, aware, impossible. That night, when I went home and shut the doors tight against the cold, I could still see the figure in my mind, walking across the ice, moving without hesitation, disappearing without a trace. I could still feel the weight of its observation, the impossible knowledge that it had seen me, and that I had seen it. And I knew, with a deep, gnawing certainty, that I would return to that lake, and it would still be there waiting. Because some things, I realized, do not belong to the natural world. They move where they shouldn't, exist where they shouldn't, and wait with patience beyond human comprehension. And when you notice them, when you see them, they notice you back. The lake had been silent when I drove past it last night, but today, in the pale light of early morning, it was even more oppressive. The fog had lifted slightly, leaving a muted gray over the frozen surface, but the cold seemed thicker, pressing down on everything like a weight. I stepped out of the patrol car, boots crunching on the frost-hardened gravel, and felt it immediately. Something in the air was wrong. I approached the edge of the lake cautiously, eyes scanning the ice. Overnight, temperatures had dropped further, and the ice had thickened, cracked in jagged lines that spread like spiderwebs beneath the pale sunlight. At first, I thought it was just a natural stress of freezing water, but then I noticed the strange shapes beneath the surface, slight distortions that didn't belong. I knelt at the edge, brushing away frost and peering closely. The ice was clear in some areas, revealing the dark, murky depth below. And there, just beneath the surface, I thought I saw a hand. At first, I couldn't believe it. My mind refused the possibility. It was probably a trick of the ice. A shadow, a branch caught in the frozen water, but the shape remained. And then another, limbs, something or someone, trapped just under the ice, frozen in time. I stumbled back a step, heart hammering. The rational part of me screamed to call backup, to leave it to the coroner, to treat this as a normal crime scene. But something deeper, primal, rooted me to the edge of the lake. I had to see it. I had to know. I moved closer again, careful, boots slipping slightly on frost. I peered through a crack in the ice, the sunlight catching on the frozen surface and making everything beneath shimmer. And there it was, a torso, partially obscured by bubbles frozen in the water, arms splayed unnaturally. I swallowed hard. My stomach twisted. I took a deep breath and tried to steady myself. This wasn't just a patrol anymore. This was something else entirely. Something that didn't belong here. That defied reason. That made my hands shake even as I knelt closer. The ice creaked beneath my weight. I froze. Every sound seemed louder than it should have been. The faint whistle of the wind, the distant call of a crow, the tiny cracks spreading outward from my boots. And beneath it all, the muted shapes of limbs, frozen just beneath the surface, pale and still, impossibly silent. I reached for the binoculars again, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The forms were clearer now. Arms bent at odd angles, fingers splayed unnaturally, legs pressed together in ways that didn't feel natural. Some seemed older, skeletal, as if they had been submerged for a long time. Others were more recent, flesh and skin frozen solid beneath the ice, preserved in the cold. A shiver ran down my spine. My chest tightened. How had this happened? How had they ended up here? And most importantly, why hadn't anyone noticed before? The lake was near the main patrol route. People walked its edges, jogged along its banks. Yet these forms had remained hidden beneath the ice, untouched, unnoticed, as if the lake itself had swallowed them. I stepped back, trying to put some distance between myself and the frozen figures. The sun glinted off the ice in sharp lines, revealing more distortions, more limbs, more shapes that shouldn't exist. The thought that this wasn't a single victim, but multiple sent a cold knot twisting through my stomach. The rational mind struggled, but the fear was undeniable. And then I saw something move. Not above the ice, not in the air, but beneath it. A faint, almost imperceptible twitch. A finger flexed. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled back further, heart hammering. The sunlight shifted, shadows playing tricks, but no, it had moved. Something was alive beneath the ice. I knelt again, gripping the edge of the frozen surface. My flashlight felt heavy in my hands, and I trained across the ice, trying to illuminate the dark shapes below. The water beneath the frozen sheet seemed impossibly dark, but every so often, a faint shimmer moved where it shouldn't. A leg, a hand, flexing slowly, deliberately, as if testing constraints of the ice above it. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, the natural imperfection of frozen water, fatigue messing with my perception. But deep down, I knew better. Something had ended up here, trapped beneath the ice, frozen in the frigid lake, and some of it, or someone, was not entirely dead. The thought made my stomach twist, and a cold sweat break across my back. I took a step back, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. The lake stretched wide, flat and silent, and the fog rolled in again, curling around the trees along the bank. The air was impossibly still, heavy with the smell of ice and mud, and every instinct told me I wasn't alone. Not just because of the forms beneath the ice, but because of something watching, something patient, something that had placed these figures here, or had waited for them to appear. I knelt again, forcing myself to study the frozen forms. Some were twisted unnaturally, limbs bent in ways that made my stomach churn. Others were nearly human in posture, peaceful almost, frozen in poses that made them look like they had simply fallen asleep. But the ice preserved them, suspended time in a cruel, cold frame, making their silence feel deliberate, intentional. And I realized then that the lake was not just a body of water. It was a container, a trap, a memory frozen in place, a warning. I could feel it pressing against me, the awareness and the stillness, the presence of something beyond my understanding, something that had orchestrated these deaths, these captures, the suspension of life beneath the ice. I could hear the faintest crack now, a sound almost drowned by my own heartbeat. The ice beneath my boots shifted, tiny fractures spreading outward in delicate, deliberate patterns. I swallowed hard, stepping back, aware that the ice could not support me for long, aware that the frozen forms beneath were not inert, aware that something else was here in the silence, watching. I pressed the flashlight across the ice again. Shapes moved subtly, almost imperceptibly, like currents beneath a frozen river. Limbs shifted, fingers twitched, and for the first time, I felt a distinct impression that they were aware of me, that their attention had turned toward my presence above. I stumbled back, voice catching. I wanted to run, to drive away, to abandon the lake and never return, but the fear was fused with fascination. I had to understand. I had to see it. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a faint, mournful hiss across the frozen lake. The ice beneath my boots creaked again, and then I noticed something. One of the forms wasn't entirely frozen. A hand pressed against the underside of the ice, fingers flexing slowly, deliberately, moving toward the surface as if testing constraints of the cold barrier above. I froze completely. My breath caught. Rational thought fled, replaced by raw, primal fear. This wasn't just corpses frozen in ice. Some part of it was alive. Some part of it had survived. Some part of it waited. And I, standing above, exposed, fragile, was its audience. I stepped back again, heart racing, and stumbled over a frost-covered branch. The sound echoed across the lake, a sharp crack that seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. The figures beneath the ice didn't move, at least not visibly, but I felt their awareness, the subtle shift of weight, the faint currents beneath the frozen surface, the impossible certainty that they knew I was here. I swallowed, forcing my fingers to stop shaking, gripping the patrol car door for stability. The sunlight had faded further, the fog rolling in thicker, curling around me, hiding the edges of the lake. And beneath the ice, the figures remained, frozen, suspended, watching, waiting. I realized then, in a cold flash of understanding, that I would never see all of them, that there were layers, depths beyond the visible, forms beneath forms, histories preserved in ice. And some part of me knew that they were aware of me, that their presence was deliberate, intentional, and that I had no control over it. I climbed back into the patrol car, hands trembling, heart hammering. The heater did little to warm me, and the fog pressed close, curling over the windshield, hiding the lake from sight. I tried to speak on the radio, but words failed me. I could only sit there, trembling, staring at the place where the ice had revealed its secret. Even as I drove away, the memory of the frozen forms beneath the ice burned in my mind. Limbs, faces, shapes impossibly suspended in the frigid water. The awareness of something alive beneath the frozen surface. The cold pressing in from all sides. The silence heavy with observation. And I knew, with an unease that wouldn't leave me, that I had not seen the last of it. That the lake, frozen and silent, contained more than water and ice. It contained memory. It contained awareness. It contained waiting. And one day, I feared, it would no longer be content to stay beneath the surface. The lake was quiet when I returned to patrol that night, but something about it felt heavier, like the cold itself had thickened, pressing against me. The patrol car's headlights cut thin beams through the early fog, illuminating jagged cracks in the ice that had widened since my last visit. I stepped on the gravel by the shore, boots crunching, the sound hollow in the stillness. The memory of the frozen forms beneath the ice gnawed at me, each thought pressing into my chest with a weight I couldn't shake. I parked near the edge and stepped out, the heater left on inside the car, doing little to fend off the chill. I swallowed hard, breathing fog into the air, trying to convince myself that nothing else would happen tonight. I told myself it was just ice, just cold, just shadows stretching in impossible shapes. Rational thoughts, normal thoughts. But the instinct that had driven me here wouldn't let me rest. Then it started. A low groan, almost imperceptible at first, rose from the ice itself. I froze, heart hammering. My breath caught. The sound grew, subtle but insistent, like the ice was settling. But not naturally. It wasn't just the shifting of frozen water. It was deliberate, resonant, vibrating through the soles of my boots. I strained to hear, every muscle tense. And then came the screams, high-pitched, agonized, echoing across the lake, carried through the fog in impossible ways. They weren't human screams. Not quite. They were warped, distorted, like the sound of something trapped, something frozen in time, twisted by cold and darkness. I stumbled back to the patrol car, body trembling, fingers numb, struggling to understand what I was hearing. The screams weren't coming from any one place. They came from the ice itself, from the depth below, from the fog curling above the frozen lake. They shifted, echoing, overlapping. Each scream felt personal, aimed at me, twisting my stomach into knots. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block them out, but it was no use. The sound was everywhere, crawling into my skull, pressing against my mind, insistent and impossible to ignore. I fumbled for the radio, voice trembling. Dispatch, something, the ice. I think there are people trapped. Static hissed back. No one responded. The fog muffled everything, swallowed my words. The screams continued, echoing, stretching across the lake, growing louder as if feeding off my fear. I stepped back, slipping slightly on frost. I scanned the ice for any sign of what could be causing this. And then I saw it, or rather, them, shifting forms beneath the surface, moving, writhing just below the frozen sheet. Faces pressed toward the light, mouths open in silent terror that carried through the ice as sound. Some were partial, skeletal shapes, others almost whole, preserved in frozen flesh. And all of them seemed aware of me, aware of the presence above, pressing their fear against a thin layer of ice. I stumbled backward, the patrol car now behind me like a fragile barrier against the impossible. The groaning beneath my feet intensified, and the fog swirled, curling low to the ice, carrying the screams closer, sharper, echoing in my ears. I wanted to run, to flee, to abandon this cursed lake forever, but my body felt rooted, unable to move, watching, unable to look away. I got back into the car finally, slamming the door shut. The heater hissed, trying to warm my frozen limbs, but the cold pressing through every crack, every joint, every pore. I tried to speak into the radio again, but my voice was hoarse, swallowed by static. The screams followed me even inside the car, echoing faintly, bouncing off the fog, carrying a sound that didn't belong in the ordinary world. I turned the car around slowly, tires crunching on frost, trying to distance myself from the lake. The fog trailed behind, curling around the headlights, hiding the edges of the ice. But the sound followed, the groans beneath the ice, the echoing screams. They didn't fade. Every mile, every turn, every stretch of empty road carried the same haunting chorus. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white, feeling the pulse in my temples as if the screams were thrumming through my skull. And then I realized something worse. It wasn't just the ice, not just the lake, not just the forms beneath it. The sound was in me now. It followed me into the car, into my chest, into my mind. I could feel the vibrations in my ribs, in my skull, in my teeth. The screaming had entered my perception, beyond hearing, beyond sound. It was a presence, a memory, a warning, and it was relentless. I drove on, heart hammering, trying to will the sound away. But every turn, every mile, every familiar street was still haunted by it. Even when I passed houses with lights on, cars parked along the road, the fog curling through the trees, the screams persisted, echoes of frozen terror that had existed beneath the ice, pressed against me, refusing to be ignored. I reached my home finally, hands trembling as I parked the car in the driveway. The heater still hummed, but it did nothing to quiet the storm inside my head. The fog lingered outside, curling around the streetlights, pressing against the windows. I stepped inside, slamming the door, and for a moment I felt the faintest relief. The screams seemed distant, muffled, but they didn't stop. They carried through the walls, through the floors, through my own mind. I collapsed into a chair, forehead pressing my knees, trying to breathe, trying to calm the rapid pulse of fear. The radio crackled faintly on the table, static hissing as if the lake itself had followed me inside. And then I heard it clearly, a whisper beneath the static, warped and distant, repeating my name, faintly echoing the agonized calls from the ice. Officer, officer. I jerked back, heart hammering, eyes wide. The sound came from nowhere and everywhere at once, like a memory that had taken physical form, like the frozen forms beneath the ice had risen in consciousness to haunt me. I pressed my hands to my ears again, willing the sound to stop, willing the night to end, willing the lake to release its grip on me. But it didn't. The ice, the frozen forms, the groans, the screams, they were inside me now. They would not leave. I could feel it in my chest, a cold, gnawing pressure that refused to fade, that refused to let me sleep. Every shadow in the room seemed to twist with a memory of that frozen lake. Every gust of wind outside sounded like the cracking of ice, carrying with it faint, distorted cries. I wanted to tell myself it was my imagination, exhaustion, stress, cold-induced hallucination, but I knew better. I had seen what was beneath the ice. I had heard it move, and now the sound followed me, persistent and alive, echoing even in the warmth of my home, refusing to be ignored. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. The fog outside had thickened, curling across the street, pressing against the windows. I could see shapes in it, fleeting glimpses of movement that made my stomach twist. And every time I blinked, every time I thought I was alone, I heard it again, the echoing screams, faint but distinct, pressing into the edges of my perception, a reminder that the lake's frozen horrors were not gone, not ever. Sleep came finally, or something like it, a restless haze of dreams. And in those dreams, I was back at the lake, standing at the edge, watching the ice shift, the limbs move, the groans rise, the screams echo. I could feel the cold pressing in, could see shapes beneath the ice, could hear them whisper my name, calling me back, always calling me back. When morning came, sunlight weak and gray, the ice appeared undisturbed, silent, flat, ordinary. But I knew the truth. I had heard what lived beneath, what stirred in frozen memory, what whispered and screamed in impossible ways. And I knew that night, the echoing screams, the presence beneath the ice, would follow me forever, pressing against my mind, my chest, my awareness, refusing to be ignored, refusing to be forgotten. Even now, sitting here at my desk, the sun high above, I can feel it. The lake, the ice, the frozen forms beneath it, they are still there, watching, waiting, echoing. And somewhere, faint but impossible to ignore, I hear the scream again, carried in memory, carried in mind, carried in the cold insistence of things that do not belong to the world as we know it. I will return to the lake. Of course, I have to. Some part of me knows I must. And I know, when I do, the screams will rise again, the ice will groan, and the frozen forms will move beneath me, aware, patient, and impossible. And the sound will follow me home, as it always has, and always will. The rain came down hard that night, drumming on the roof of the patrol car in a relentless rhythm. The highway was slick and dark, the reflective paint lines blurred by water. I had been on the road for hours, the kind of night where even the familiar curves and bends of Highway 37 felt unfamiliar, distant, almost dangerous. My radio crackled to life, snapping me out of monotony. Unit 4 Alpha, we got a report of a stalled vehicle near mile marker 12. Rain's heavy, visibility low. Check it out. Over. I acknowledged the dispatch and gripped the wheel a little tighter. Of course, a stalled car on a highway in this storm could be nothing, or it could be the start of a nightmare. The highway was empty, save for the occasional flicker of taillights disappearing into the sheets of rain. I drove slowly, wipers squealing, the headlights cutting narrow beams through the darkness. I arrived at the mile marker and slowed to a crawl. The rain pelted the windshield, washing away any sense of clarity. There, barely visible through the downpour, was the car. Its hazard lights flickered weakly, a pale, blinking signal in the darkness. I parked behind it, leaving enough distance to react if something went wrong. My boots hit the wet asphalt as I stepped out, the storm immediately soaking me through. The car was old, the kind you see rusting on the side of the road in small towns. But it wasn't the make or model that unsettled me. It was the way it sat there, still and silent, almost watching me through the rain-streaked windows. I approached cautiously, flashlight raised. Every step echoed softly, swallowed by the sound of rain hammering the pavement and the distant rumble of thunder. I tapped on the window. No movement. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. Inside, the interior was damp from rain dripping in from a half-open window. Empty. I checked the back seat. Empty. My mind raced. Dispatch hadn't mentioned whether anyone was in the vehicle. Maybe they had wandered off into the woods nearby, seeking shelter, or maybe they'd called for a tow and wandered down the road. I stepped back, shining the flashlight across the surrounding area. Trees lined the highway on both sides, black and wet, branches twisting in the wind. The storm distorted sounds, making the distance of things impossible to judge. And then I noticed a faint movement, a shadow, maybe flitting between two trees. My heart picked up. I strained to see, flashlight beam cutting through the sheets of rain, but the figure, or whatever it was, disappeared. I leaned close to the car window again, hoping to see a reflection, a movement, a clue. That's when I saw him. Or maybe I should say, I felt him before I saw him. A man, standing just at the edge of the headlights, soaked through, his face pale, expression impossible to read in the rain. He didn't move toward me, didn't raise a hand in greeting. He simply stood there, silent, watching. "Hey!" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, professional. "You okay? Need some help?" No response. Just the sound of rain, the patter on asphalt, the distant rumble of thunder. I took a step closer, flashlight trained on him. The closer I got, the more wrong it felt. Something about him didn't fit. His posture, his stillness, the way his clothes clung to his body, sodden and darkened, blending almost seamlessly with the shadows behind him. I forced myself to take another step, and then he moved. Not toward me, not in a normal human motion, just shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging my presence without really existing in the same space. A chill ran down my spine. I tried the radio again. "Dispatch, I've got a person on scene. Appears unharmed, but I'm not sure. Over." Static. Just static. I cursed under my breath, adjusting the volume, fiddling with the knobs. Rain hammered harder. Visibility worse than ever. When I turned back, he was gone. The man. The shadow. The figure that had been standing in the rain. Nothing but empty road. Slick asphalt. The flicker of the car's hazard lights. I shook my head. Rational thoughts told me he retreated into the trees, seeking cover. But my gut told me otherwise. Something about him wasn't human, or at least not normal. I moved closer to the car again, flashlight scanning every shadow, every dark patch of wet asphalt. The sound of the storm was deafening, but somewhere beneath it, I thought I heard breathing. I froze, just a faint exhale, maybe lost in the rhythm of rain, or maybe not. My instinct screamed at me to get back to the patrol car, to leave, to not look. But the officer in me, trained to investigate, to ensure no one was in danger, rooted me to the spot. I circled the car slowly, boots squelching on wet asphalt, flashlight beams slicing through rain and shadow. Nothing. The trees remained motionless, the road empty beyond the hazard lights. But that sense of being watched persisted, pressing into the back of my mind, curling around my chest like a weight. I leaned down, peering into the passenger seat. It was still empty. I checked the back seat again. Still nothing. And then I saw it, something on the floorboard, a small object, barely visible in the dark, glistening with rainwater. I reached for it, heart hammering. A wallet, old, soaked, partially disintegrated from rain. No identification inside, just a few soaked bills and photograph. The photo was what made me freeze. It was the man, or at least it appeared to be him, standing in front of the same highway, same car, same pose, except the image looked wrong. His eyes too dark, too empty, staring directly at me through the photograph, and the way the photo shimmered in the rain, made it almost alive. A clap of thunder rattled the car, and I stumbled backward, hard in my throat. I felt foolish. Rational thought tried to remind me this was just a coincidence. Maybe a prank. Maybe my mind playing tricks after a long night of driving in the storm. But my instincts told me otherwise. Something was here, watching, waiting. I climbed back into the patrol car, soaked through, heart hammering. The warmth of the heater did little to calm me. I adjusted the rear view mirror, checking the road behind. Empty. Nothing. But the feeling persisted. The highway stretched behind me, endless black, wet and alive with possibility. And somewhere I knew the man, or whatever it had been, was still out there. I tried to drive away, tried to focus on the mundane, road lines, hazard lights, rain-slick asphalt. But every shadow in the trees, every flicker of lightning, seemed to suggest he was still there, watching from just beyond sight. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, heart pounding in a rhythm that matched the storm. The radio crackled again, faintly, and I tried to respond, but the static overwhelmed my voice. And then, for a brief moment, I thought I heard him call my name. Not clearly, not in a normal voice, but in a whisper that carried through the rain, sharp and impossible. I jerked the wheel, scanning the road. Nothing, just rain, asphalt, and the relentless storm. And yet, I knew what I had heard. The sound lingered, pressing against my ears, curling into my chest. I was not alone. I kept driving, eyes darting to the roadside, trees, anything that could hide him. Every time I glanced, I swore I saw the faintest movement, a shape among the shadows, a figure standing just beyond reach, watching, waiting. And every time, I reminded myself, it's the storm, the dark, the night playing tricks. Yet the fear gnawed at me, persistent, unrelenting. By the time I reached the edge of town, headlights cutting through wet streets, the rain beginning to ease, I felt the weight of that figure still pressing in my mind. I had seen him or seen something, but the memory burned, insistent and impossible to ignore. He hadn't moved into the woods. He hadn't disappeared entirely. He had left a mark, an impression on my awareness that refused to fade. At home, I tried to shake it off. Showered, changed, sat by the heater with a cup of lukewarm coffee. But I could still see him, still see the empty eyes, the way he had shifted, the weight of his presence in the storm. The photograph, now dry on the counter, seemed to shimmer faintly, reminded me that the night had left more than wet clothes and soaked asphalt in its wake. Sleep that night was impossible. Every creak of the house, every shadow cast by the streetlights outside, made my chest tighten. I kept thinking I saw him, just for a moment, standing at the edge of my driveway, wet and pale, staring through the darkness. Every time I blinked, the image dissolved, replaced by the ordinary, but the fear remained, persistent, personal, imprinted, and I knew, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart hammering, that the storm hadn't ended. The man on Highway 37 hadn't gone anywhere. He was out there, somewhere, patient and deliberate, watching, waiting, and I had no idea why, or what would happen the next time I saw him. Because that night, the storm had brought more than rain. It had brought something impossible, something aware, something that didn't belong. And I was left with nothing but the memory of him, the echo of his silence, and the knowledge that I had glimpsed something that would not let me forget. The highway had emptied since the storm earlier, leaving only the slick asphalt glinting under my headlights. I drove slowly, eyes darting to the roadside, checking every shadow for movement. My mind kept replaying previous night, the figure standing in the rain, the photograph, the impossible silence that carried more weight than any scream. I told myself it had been one of those nights, the kind that stretch time and twist perception. But something in my gut said otherwise. Dispatch had called again, a vague report from a passing motorist. A car stopped on the same stretch of Highway 37. No one had seen anyone inside. I cursed under my breath, gripping the wheel tighter. Another night, another empty vehicle. But something about this one felt different already. I pulled over a little past mile marker 14. There it was. Headlights off, hazard lights blinking dimly, but otherwise still. The rain had eased into a drizzle, wet mist curling over the pavement like a ghostly breath. I cut the engine, leaving only the faint hum of the patrol car's interior lights. My boots squelched on wet asphalt as I stepped out, flashlight rays scanning the car. It was an ordinary vehicle at first glance. A sedan, dark blue, paint chipped and dull. But the moment I approached, my stomach tightened. The windows were fogged from the inside, streaked with moisture. The air around the car felt heavier, charged, like it was holding its breath. My hand rested on the door handle, ready to pull it open slowly. The moment I touched it, I felt a strange warmth radiating from inside. The engine was off, no lights on, but the warmth was unmistakable. It wasn't just residual heat from a recently parked vehicle. It was something else, alive, deliberate, impossible. I circled the car, flashlight slicing through the mist, ears straining. The rain had stopped enough that I could hear faint sounds. The drip of water off the roof, the occasional rustle of trees in the breeze, and then the faintest whispering. Static. I froze, scanning the area. Nothing. But the static wasn't from my radio. It was coming from inside the car, a soft hiss that seemed to grow when I leaned closer. I pressed my ear to the driver's side window, and I could just make out words, or at least what sounded like them. Faint, warped, twisting syllables that might have been human, or might have been the wind speaking through some impossible conduit. And then, unmistakably, my name. Officer! Officer! The whisper curled around my mind, pressing against my temples. My hair stood on end. I stepped back, shaking my head, trying to convince myself it was a storm playing tricks, some leftover memory of the night before. But the warmth inside the car, the persistent whispering, the feeling of being watched, it was real. I opened the driver's side door slowly. The interior smelled faintly of wet upholstery, and something else, something metallic, almost iron-like. The seat was damp, still warm, as if someone had just been there moments ago. The dashboard lights flickered briefly, then dimmed again, leaving only the faint glow of the hazard indicators. I leaned in, flashlight sweeping across the interior. Empty. No one. Not a single item to suggest anyone had left in a hurry. No footprints outside. No tire marks in gravel beyond what was already there. It was as if the car had been abandoned, yet somehow remained occupied, aware, alive. The whispering grew louder, static that coiled into words, curling through the air impossibly close. My name again, stretched and distorted, repeated over and over. I wanted to speak, to call out, but my throat was tight. Every instinct told me to run, to leave, to forget the car existed at all. But my training, stubborn and ingrained, held me in place. I had to investigate. I had to understand. I stepped fully inside, boots pressing against the wet floor mats. The warmth was more pronounced now, radiating up through the seat, through the soles of my boots. My hands shook as I reached for the radio. I tapped it, fingers trembling. Dispatch, car is unoccupied but warm, radio, static, maybe a malfunction, over. Nothing, just static, the kind that sounded like whispers now, merging with a soft patter of rain on the roof. I froze. The whispers didn't come from the radio. They came from the very air inside the car, vibrating through my chest, pressing at the edges of my mind. I leaned back, trying to calm myself, scanning the vehicle again. The rear view mirror caught a flicker of movement. Or maybe it was just my imagination. But I swear I saw a shadow, a figure seated in the back, hunched and silent. I spun around. Empty. Just a wet, dark interior. Faint steam rising from the damp upholstery. And yet the feeling persisted. Someone or something was there, watching, waiting. The warmth, the whispering, the unnatural sense of presence. Every rational thought collided with the certainty in my gut. This car was not normal. I tried to leave, opened the door to step out. The whispering intensified, curling into shrill, jagged sound that made my chest tighten. I glanced back inside, and for a moment, impossible and fleeting, I thought I saw him. The figure from the highway last night. Pale, dripping wet, expression unreadable. Only his eyes, they were fixated on me. Hollow black, endless. I blinked. Gone. Just a car. Empty, silent again. I forced myself to breathe, gripping the doorframe. The patrol car sat across the highway, headlights cutting through mist, ordinary in every way. And yet I felt the pull, the presence, the weight pressing to the wet air and into my bones. I had to get back to my car, had to escape. But as I stepped away, the whispers followed. Static whispers, indistinct but insistent, curling around me, pressing against the rain, shaping the air itself. My name again, over and over, warped, stretched, in tones that should not exist outside the human voice. I reached the patrol car, hands slippery on the wet handle, heart hammering. I slid inside, slamming the door shut. Heat and safety seemed to rush back in, but only partially. The whispers were faint now, distant, yet undeniably there, threading through the air vents, curling around the edges of the car. I pressed the radio to my ear again. Static, words buried in the static. My name, my name. I tried to focus on the road, to drive away, to remind myself of the ordinary, to ground myself. But every glance in the rearview mirror carried a shadow, a possibility, a memory of the figure. And the warmth, the unnatural warmth, haunted me, like something had left its impression, its memory, inside the car, waiting, patient, intent. The drive back to town was slow, deliberate. Every mile stretched, every shadow among the trees seemed alive, watching, waiting. And at every curve, every flash of lightning, I felt the whisper pressing closer, closer, impossible to ignore. I kept looking into the passenger seat, expecting, fearing that the figure might appear again, but it never did. The car remained empty, warm, alive. By the time I reached the town limits, rain finally easing into drizzle, the feeling lingered. I could still hear faint static in my ears, threads of whisper curling and twisting with each passing vehicle. Sleep would not come easy tonight. I knew. The highway, the storm, the empty car, it had left something behind. Something that existed just beyond sight, just beyond reason, just beyond my understanding. I parked in a lot at the station, leaving the patrol car running for a moment, flashlight still in hand. The thought of the empty car, still warm, still whisper my name, pressed into me like a weight I could not lift. I stepped inside, shook off the damp, tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, a long night, stress, imagination. But deep down, I knew better. The highway was not safe. The storm was not over. And whatever had been in that car, whatever had left its presence there, was patient, waiting, watching. Even now, sitting at my desk in the station, coffee cooling in a mug, I can feel it. The warmth, the whispering, threads of static curling in my mind. And I know the next time someone calls about a stalled car on Highway 37, the same feeling will be there, waiting, patient, unseen, and I will hear it again, my name, softly, impossibly, carrying through the rain and into my very mind. The night was heavy, thick with mist that clung to the edges of the highway like a living thing. My patrol car's headlights cut through the fog, throwing long, distorted shadows along the trees. Every mile felt longer than it should, each curve of the road revealing the same black, wet asphalt stretching into nowhere. I had been driving slowly, eyes darting to every roadside dip, every tree line, because after the events of the empty car, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there just beyond reach. I was almost a mile marker 16 when I saw it, a flash of movement. At first, I thought it was a raccoon or maybe a deer spooked by my headlights. But it wasn't an animal. It was human-shaped, or at least roughly so. Dark, slender, running across the center of the road. Impossible to see clearly in the fog. My heart skipped a beat. I slammed on the brakes, tires hissing against the wet pavement. The figure vanished. I froze, breath catching in my throat. There was no sound of movement, nothing but the quiet hum of the car's engine and the faint rustle of leaves in the misty breeze. The headlights swept across the roadside again, illuminating wet gravel, glistening grass, and then nothing. No footprints in the shallow mud, no sign that anyone had crossed at all, except for one detail. The deep, singular set of prints embedded in the soft dirt beside the asphalt. They were enormous, much too large for a human. and they stopped abruptly, like whoever or whatever had made them have been pulled upward, away from the ground. My stomach turned. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the fog, the shadows, my own exhaustion, but the prints were real. Mud clinging to the edges of the depression, damp and fresh, and the way they ended, suddenly, impossibly, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I stepped out of the car, flashlight sweeping the area. Mist curled around the trees like smoke. Curling through the beams of light, the prints led to the edge of the woods, disappearing into dark undergrowth. I crouched, pressing my fingers against the damp soil, feeling the chill soak through my gloves. I shouldn't have done it. Something about the air changed then, subtle at first, a pressure, like the moment before a storm hits. The instant the wind shifts and carries an unplaceable smell. The warmth, the unnatural warmth I felt in the car, seemed come back, brushing along the edges of my senses. I stood slowly, scanning the trees, every instinct screaming that I was being watched. And then I heard it, a faint whisper, just beyond the edge of the headlights, curling in and out of the fog. "Officer." The voice wasn't loud, and I couldn't place it, couldn't locate it, but it carried the same warped, impossible cadence as the whispers from the abandoned car. My heart pounded, fingers tightening on the flashlight. I wanted to run, wanted to retreat, but I couldn't move, every muscle stiff, every nerve alert. The prints were there, yes, but the presence that was stronger, heavier, like it pressed down from above and behind, though nothing was visible. I stepped closer to the first print at the edge of the woods. The ground was softer there, wet, yielding under my boots. The print was deep, almost unnatural, dug into the soil as if someone had been anchored there. I reached down and touched the edges. The cold seeped through my glove, biting into my fingers. And then I realized there were small streaks of something darker mixed with the mud. Not water, not mud, something else. I swallowed hard, forcing my gaze upward into the fog. The trees loomed, silhouettes twisted and strange in the mist. A branch snapped somewhere to my left. My breath hitched. I swept the flashlight in that direction, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a shadow crouching just behind a tree. I blinked. Gone. The whispers began again, faint, static tinge, curling through the night. My name, always my name. Soft, warped, impossible to locate. And then, the feeling of being right beside me, though nothing was there. I spun, flashlight sweeping wildly, and my heart froze. A figure appeared at the very edge of the beams, dark, dripping with moisture from the fog, eyes like black holes reflecting nothing. It stood for a moment, completely still. Then with a sudden dash, it was gone. No sound of feet, no rustle of clothing. Just vanished, leaving only the prints in the dirt, deeper than any human weight should make. I stumbled back, heart hammering, the smell of wet earth and something iron-like pressing against my senses. I fumbled for the radio, fingers shaking. Dispatch. I've got. Static, the same high pitch, whispering static I'd heard from the car. I gritted my teeth, adjusting knobs, pressing buttons, trying to make sense of it. Words, or something like them, twisted out of the static, garbled, warped. And beneath it, unmistakable, my name. Officer, officer. I dropped the radio, heart racing. My hands trembled, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. The prints in the dirt seemed to pulse, almost as if they were alive, soaking into the ground, feeding off the pressure of my gaze. I wanted to leave, run back to the car, to town, anywhere, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. Every instinct screamed at me, a primal alarm I could not ignore. Then something even worse. The air shifted behind me, a cold, unnatural current. I turned slowly, flashlight sweeping, and there it was again, a figure, standing in the trees, just at the edge of the light. Same posture as before, motionless, impossibly still. Eyes fixed on me, though I couldn't see them clearly, only feel their weight. And that warmth, it pressed down on me, right through my jacket, into my chest. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. My mind scrambled for rational explanations. A lost hiker, a prank, hallucination. But the feeling told me otherwise. This was not human. This was something older, deliberate, patient. Something that existed alongside the world. Unseen until it chose to reveal itself. A step and it vanished. No sound, no movement. Nothing but the damp earth and the impossibly deep prints. I stumbled back toward the patrol car. Flashlight shaking. Heart racing in a rhythm I could feel in my throat. I didn't dare take my eyes off the edge of the woods, even as I climbed inside the car, slamming the door shut. The warmth followed me, pressing through the seat, through the floor, and into my bones. Static hummed faintly in the car, faint whispers curling around the interior like smoke. My breath came in shallow, quick bursts. I tried the radio again, desperate for contact. The words were there, faint, distorted, mingled with static, and I knew it was repeating my name once more. My own voice sounded foreign as I shouted into the mic, but nothing came through. I drove slowly back toward town, every mile stretching longer than the last. Every shadow in the fog seemed alive, every tree branch a possible hiding place. The prints in the dirt haunted me, the knowledge that something had been there, and it was waiting, patient, deliberate. By the time I reached the first streetlights of town, my hands were numb from gripping the wheel, my eyes dry and strained from the mist and adrenaline. I kept glancing at the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see the figure on the road behind me, the impossible shadow following. But the street was empty, ordinary, banal. Yet the sense of presence remained, pressing in, insistent, impossible to shake. At home, I locked the doors, checked the windows, but the memory of the prints, the shadow, the whispers, followed me inside. Even now, as I sit writing this down, the impression remains. I can still feel the weight of those black, endless eyes, the pulse of warmth where no human presence could exist, the static whisper my name curling around the edges of my awareness. I don't know what it was. A hallucination? Some supernatural force? I only know it's out there, waiting along the roads I patrol, patient, deliberate. And I know if I ever see those deep footprints in the dirt again, I will not be ready. Not really, because a shadow on a road does not leave marks just for luck. It leaves them as a promise that it has been here, that it will return, and that I am not alone. I had expected the town to come into view by now. The familiar glow of streetlights, the outline of the diner at the corner, the courthouse clock faintly lit in the distance. But mile after mile, the highway stretched on, black and slick, lined with trees that seemed taller, closer, as if they had grown while I wasn't looking. The fog hung low, heavier than before, curling across the road in slow, deliberate waves. I checked the dashboard clock. 10 minutes had passed since I left the last mile marker, but it should have been more. The headlights cut through the mist, illuminating the same curve, the same broken sign, the same patch of wet asphalt. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Maybe it was the adrenaline. Maybe the fog and exhaustion were playing tricks. But then it happened again. A curve, and there it was. The same fallen branch I'd passed too, or was it 20 minutes ago? The same slick patch of oil. The same rusted guardrail dented in the exact same spot. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, trying to rationalize. Maybe I'd taken a wrong turn. Maybe the roads looped back unexpectedly. But deep down, a voice in my head told me this was impossible. I radioed dispatch. My voice shook, careful, trying to sound professional. Dispatch, this is Officer. I'm returning from Highway 37 and, over. Static, long, distorted. And beneath it, faintly, impossibly, my name whispered to the interference. I gritted my teeth, trying again. Dispatch, you copy? Highway 37, repeat. Silence, broken only by the hum of the engine and the soft slap of tires against wet asphalt. No reply, not the usual crackle of voices, not the comforting murmur of another human being. Nothing, just me, the road, and the fog. A shadow flickered at the edge of my headlights. Something small crouched, moving just beyond the trees. I slammed my foot on the brake, tires screeching against wet pavement, heart hammering. I swept the flashlight across the roadside from the car, but the fog swallowed it instantly. Nothing, just the same trees, the same black trunks rising into the mist. I drove on, slower this time, scanning every curve, Every shadow, my stomach tight with the knowledge that I wasn't alone. And then I noticed it. The town, when it finally appeared, or at least what should have been the town, was subtly different. The diner sign was the same shape, same size, but the letters were slightly off. The courthouse clock ticked a different time. A street lamp that had always been broken flickered now, casting pale yellow light over perfectly dry pavement despite the rain moments before. My hand shook on the wheel. Something wasn't right. Everything familiar was wrong. Slightly off, like looking at a reflection in warped glass. I tried to rationalize. Maybe fatigue. Maybe the fog was affecting my perception. But I knew better. The weight of that knowledge pressed down through my chest, through my shoulders, until it felt like it could crush me. The road was repeating. I was repeating. And whatever had followed me, whatever left those deep footprints on the dirt, whatever had whispered my name, was still out there, watching, waiting. The streetlights passed like markers in a dream. I tried to turn onto a side street, desperate to break the loop, but the road curved back, always back to the same stretch. Same branch, same guardrail, same patch of slick asphalt. I could feel panic rising, curling in my stomach like acid. My breath came fast, shallow. But I forced myself to focus on the familiar rhythm of the patrol car's engine. I tried the radio again. Static, whispers, my name, stretching and echoing, almost like it came from the trees themselves. I gripped the wheel with both hands, knuckles burning, and pressed forward. I had to reach town, had to report the strange figure, the footprints, the whispers, had to convince someone that this wasn't my imagination. But the town refused to appear as it should. Houses were too close together or too far apart. Streetlights flickered in patterns I didn't recognize. The diner's neon flickered in a sequence that wasn't right. It was subtle but unmistakable. The familiar became uncanny, the ordinary warped. And then I saw it, a figure, standing on the side of the road, just beyond the fog, dark, featureless, human-shaped, watching me. I swerved slightly, tires skidding, and when I looked again, gone. Nothing but the fog curling in on itself. But I knew it had moved. I could feel it, a presence pressing at the edges of my mind, heavy and patient. I slowed the car, heart hammering. The road stretched endlessly ahead, curving impossibly, as if mocking me. I thought about turning around, but every time I tried, the highway seemed to fold back on itself, looping, trapping me in the slow, deliberate nightmare. The whispers started again, low at first, curling through the fog, brushing against my skull, then louder, distorted. My name, over and over, warping into something not quite human, not quite language. I pressed my hands to my ears, tried to shake it off, but it was inside me, inside my head, a thread connecting me to the figure I couldn't see, couldn't escape, couldn't confront. I drove on, eyes scanning for any sign of safety, anything familiar, a street sign, a mailbox, a tree I recognized. But the road kept repeating. Every turn brought me back to the same stretch, the same branch, the same slick patch of asphalt. My stomach churned. Panic clawed at me. I knew that if I stopped, if I slowed, if I hesitated, I might never leave. And then, from the corner of my eye, movement in the mist. A figure, this time closer. A dark shadow crouched low, darting from tree to tree, always just at the edge of the light. I slammed the brakes, fog spraying from the tires. The figure vanished into the night again. But this time, deep, wet footprints appeared on the asphalt. Just one set, leading off the road into the fog. I forced myself to breathe, blinked, shook my head. The footprints, they were enormous, like the ones on the dirt from the other night. And they ended abruptly, right at the edge of the trees. Nothing beyond. The whispers came again, louder now, almost a roar in my head, curling into a chorus of static and warped syllables. My name, over and over, repeating, following, taunting. I slammed the car into gear and drove faster, desperate, screaming at the fog, at the road, at the town that had become a twisted mirror of itself. My headlights cut through the mist, but the road didn't change. Curves looped impossibly. Houses flickered. Signs shifted. Every familiar landmark warped, subtle but undeniable. I was trapped in a nightmare that looked like my own town, my own highway, but it was wrong. It was deliberate. Hours, minutes? I couldn't tell past. Exhaustion clawed at me, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't look away. Every mile brought the same curve, the same guardrail, the same slick patch of asphalt. I felt myself slipping into a cold, creeping dread, a realization that I wasn't going to reach safety, that the figure, the whispers, the impossible loop of road, they were patient, waiting, observing, feeding. I forced myself to focus, try to remember the town as it should be, try to remind myself of the normal lights, the normal streets, the normal houses, but the fog mocked me, twisting everything into a subtle, creeping wrongness. And all the while, the whispers followed, inside and outside my mind, winding tighter, pressing, repeating my name. By the time I finally pulled off the road, if I had, everything was drenched in mist. My patrol car headlights caught nothing but the fog curling in on itself, and a shadow at the edge of the road, impossibly still, watching. I didn't stay to look. I didn't stop to consider. I drove straight into the night, hoping the next turn might lead me back to reality, back to the familiar, back to the town that should have been waiting for me. But even now, I know it isn't over. The road doesn't just repeat. It remembers. The figure waits. The whispers continue. And no matter how far I drive, how fast, how desperately I cling to reason, I feel the pull of that endless highway, calling me back, stretching the night into infinity, until I understand that some roads don't lead home. They only lead you deeper into the watching dark. The fog had grown thicker by the time I realized I was truly lost. Every familiar landmark, every street sign, every turn I thought I recognized, it was wrong. Subtle at first, almost invisible, a curve where there had never been one, a streetlight casting yellow where it should have been white, a mailbox standing too far forward. The town I had known my entire life was different, distorted, a mirror of itself, but warped, and I couldn't call for help. I reached for the radio on the patrol car dashboard, fingers shaking. Dispatch. Anyone. My voice fell hollow even as I spoke. Dispatch. This is officer. Coming over. Static. A long, drawn-out hiss. And then my own voice. Faint at first, distant, like it had come from another room entirely, echoing over the usual radio chatter I expected. My own words repeated. Dispatch. This is officer. Coming over. I froze. My stomach turned to ice. My voice, not mine. Or, not me. I fumbled with the knobs, trying to adjust the frequency, to break whatever interference had swallowed the channel. I tried again, louder this time, desperation spiking through every nerve. Dispatch. I'm on Highway 37. Do you copy? I need backup. Over. The static roared, warped, and once more, the voice came. My voice. Calling. Repeating. Not over the airwaves. Not somewhere far away. Right there inside the car, inside my head, pressed against my skull. My own voice. Screaming into the fog, into the night, asking for help that I knew I wouldn't receive. I dropped the microphone, shaking, fingers trembling, and pressed both hands to my face. Breathe, I told myself. Just breathe. But the sound didn't stop. I could hear my own words, warped and distorted, mixing with static, over and over, repeating endlessly, each syllable like a knife scraping the inside of my skull. I slammed my palms against the dashboard, hoping to silence it, but it didn't work. The patrol car was small, enclosed, yet the whispers filled every corner, pressing against my eardrums. My name, my voice, my panic, it all blended together until I couldn't separate reality from illusion. And then the road. I looked up through the windshield. Fog curling along the edges of the headlights. The highway stretched forward, black, slick, twisting impossibly. And in the distance, the faint glimmer of a streetlight. Or maybe it was just a reflection, a trick of the fog. I knew I should turn back. I knew I should stop, get out of the car, run, but my legs refused. My hands gripped the wheel until my knuckles burned. The headlights caught something. Movement at the edge of the fog. A figure, crouching, shifting slowly from side to side. I slammed on the brakes, tires hissing, and the car skidded slightly. But when the fog cleared, nothing was there. Only the slick asphalt, the faint reflection of my headlights, and the heavy, pressing silence. I swallowed hard, tried to call dispatch again, fumbling with the radio, twisting knobs, flipping switches. My own voice returned, louder now, clearer, echoing across the dashboard. Not a recording, not a trick, a live, distorted version of me, begging for help. I leaned back in my seat, chest heaving, and for the first time felt the weight of real fear settle over me. Not adrenaline, not tension, but raw, unshakable terror. Something was wrong. Something about the night, the fog, the repeating roads, the endless loops. It wasn't natural. It wasn't random. And whatever had followed me before, it was still here. I needed to see, needed to confirm. I opened the car door just a crack. Cold fog poured in, curling around my legs, soaking through my uniform. The silence was absolute, except for the softness of the radio still repeating my voice. I leaned out, squinting into the mist, flashlight in hand, and scanned the roadside. And there, just beyond the edge of visibility, I saw it. Shadows moving between the trees. Slow, deliberate, almost human, but not human. Watching, waiting. I felt the weight of their gaze pressing in, tangible, like a hand against my chest. I slammed the door shut, fumbling for the locks, heart hammering. The radio screamed then, all static in my own voice, my own pleading. I pressed my hands to my ears. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. From the trees, the fog, the asphalt, the car itself. I tried to drive, push the car forward, tires skidding slightly, fog curling around the headlights. Every mile, the whispers followed. My voice, distorted, warped, echoing, screaming for help I couldn't reach. I tried to turn off the radio. Power switch, volume knob, the whole damn dashboard. Nothing silenced it. My own voice continued to call, insistent, urgent, hopeless, and then a figure. At first, I thought it was a trick of the fog, a shadow among shadows. But it wasn't. It stepped onto the road. Tall, impossibly still, blackened against the fog. Eyes, though I couldn't see them clearly, seemed to bore into me. I pressed the brake, tires squealing, but the figure didn't move. Did it blink? I couldn't tell. But in that moment, I realized something worse than fear. The figure, it knew me. It knew my panic, my voice, my name. I slammed the car into reverse. Tires churning on the wet asphalt. The figure didn't react, didn't move, just stood there waiting. And my voice, the warped, distorted echo, continued to scream through the car, calling for help, repeating my desperation in a way that sounded almost alive. I drove backward for what felt like hours, twisting the wheel, desperate to escape the fog, the road, the figure. The whispers continued. And then, subtly at first, I realized something. No matter which direction I drove, the road looped, curves repeated. Guardrails appeared in the exact same spots. The same slick patch of asphalt. The same fallen branch. I was trapped in a circle, driving endlessly, chased by my own voice, followed by that impossibly still figure. I tried to close my eyes for a moment, tried to breathe, tried to will myself awake from the nightmare. But the radio, no, not the radio. My voice, my own pleading voice, filled the car, echoing through my skull until I could barely tell the difference between inside and outside, between reality and the warped, distorted world the night had become. The figure moved closer, or maybe it had always been closer. My headlights caught a flash of it, just a corner of its shape, impossibly dark, almost liquefied in the fog. And then it vanished again. I blinked and the road curved again, looping, folding back on itself. Endless, relentless, panic clawed at my chest. I tried the radio one more time. Desperation, urgency, authority all tangled in my voice. Dispatch. This is Officer. I'm on Highway 37. I need assistance. Repeat assistance. And again, my own voice answered, screaming, repeating, over and over. No words, no answers. Only my own fear magnified, reflected, and warped. I could feel my heartbeat in my temples and my ears, pounding louder than the tires on asphalt, louder than the fog pressing around me, louder than my own screaming echo. I don't know how long I drove like that. Minutes? Hours? Time had lost its meaning. Every turn, every curve, every shadow in the fog, repetition, endless repetition. My own voice, my own terror. The figure somewhere, always just at the edge, watching, waiting, patient, calculating. Eventually, exhaustion took me, or maybe resignation. I don't know which. I stopped the car, knees shaking, hands trembling, the fog pressing close, curling against the car, filling every crack and crevice. The radio continued to scream my voice, my own pleas for help warped and twisted by static and something else. Something alive, something patient, something that had been here all along. I shut my eyes for a moment, trying to breathe, trying to imagine the town as it should be. Streetlights, the diner, the courthouse clock, all familiar, all normal. But the fog pressed in. The whispers continued. My own voice still called, still screamed, still begged. And I understood. This wasn't about help. There would be no help. There would be no rescue. The figure, the fog, the repeating roads, the endless loops, the vanishing dispatch. It was all designed to trap me. Not physically, not in a traditional sense, but in mind, in perception, in reality itself. When I finally opened my eyes, the radio had gone silent, but the figure was there again, just beyond the fog, impossibly still, impossibly patient. And the road stretched endlessly ahead, curling and folding, inviting me forward, deeper into the watching, listening night. I started the car again, knowing that whatever lay ahead, whatever waited at the next curve or the next repetition, I couldn't stop. Not yet, not ever. Because the vanishing dispatch wasn't just a broken radio or a technical glitch. It was a warning, a prelude, a reminder that some calls for help are answered by the night itself. And the night always listens, always watches, and always repeats. The car's tires crunch over gravel that I didn't recognize, though the outline of the street seemed familiar. Or maybe it wasn't the street itself. Maybe it was a memory of it, warped and distorted. Like a photograph left too long in the sun. Everything was muted. The colors, the shapes, the edges, they were all wrong. Faded, yet too sharp, unreal yet stubbornly real. I parked at the end of what I thought was my street. The fog had thinned slightly, but that only made the scene more disturbing. The houses that lined the road were familiar, at least in memory, yet they flickered. One moment, the roof was intact. The next, the shingles were missing. Windows appeared and disappeared. Doors swung slightly, though there was no wind. I stepped out, boots sinking slightly into soft, wet earth. The air smelled wrong, damp and metallic, with a faint, cloying sweetness that made the back of my throat ache. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, but it wasn't just inside me. I could hear it, faintly at first, echoing unnaturally around the houses, bouncing off walls that weren't really there. I shook my head, tried to tell myself it was fatigue, stress, isolation, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I walked slowly, keeping my flashlight raised. Each step seemed to drag on longer than the last, like the ground itself resisted me. Shadows flickered in peripheral vision, but when I turned, nothing was there, just the same warped houses, the same warped street. Everything familiar had become unfamiliar. From one of the houses, a window opened, and I saw a figure inside, just standing, staring, motionless. Not a human I recognized, though it had the shape of one. Dark clothing, featureless face, posture too rigid. I swallowed hard, tried to call out, tried to force my voice past the tight knot in my throat. "Hello," I said. My voice sounded thin, foreign to me, even in my own ears. The figure didn't respond. It just stared, head slightly tilted as if studying me, and then it blinked, or at least I thought it did, and vanished. The window was empty. No curtain, no glass, nothing. I felt the pulse of my own heartbeat again, louder this time, echoing, not in my chest, but all around me. Each thumb pressed against my skull like a hammer. Step, thump, step, thump. It was synchronized with my movements, yet offbeat, too deliberate, too loud. It wasn't normal. It wasn't natural. I tried to reach the front porch of one of the houses, thinking maybe if I touched something real, I could ground myself. But the porch shifted under my hand. My fingers sank through what should have been wood, solid wood, and then the house flickered again, changing. Another porch, another roofline, another wrong color. Panic clawed at my chest. I spun in a circle, trying to orient myself to find something solid, something consistent. But every time I turned, the town seemed to move with me. Houses shifted positions. Streetlights flickered, casting long, impossible shadows that bent in directions they shouldn't. The fog curled unnaturally around the corners, swallowing things whole only to spit them back out slightly wrong. And the whispers returned. Not the static this time, not the radio. Just a low, insistent murmuring carried on the wind. My name, my voice, echoing through the town, through the streets, through the warped houses. I could feel it vibrating in my bones. I tried to run, but every step I took felt heavier. The street stretched endlessly, a narrow corridor of fog and warped structures, and each stride brought me back to the same spot, the same window, the same dark figure, watching, waiting. I couldn't escape it. Couldn't escape this town that was mine, and yet wasn't. I stopped, gasping for breath, flashlight shaking in my hands. The shadows around me seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my heartbeat. Step, thump, step, thump, step, thump. Faster now, matching my rising panic. My pulse wasn't my own anymore. Movement in the corner of my vision. Figures, dozens of them, standing silently along the street, watching. Featureless faces, unblinking eyes, not moving, but I could feel them leaning forward slightly intent, like predators waiting. I spun to confront them. Nothing. Only fog. Only warped houses. Only the soft, rhythmic echo of my heartbeat filling my head, drowning out every rational thought. I tried call dispatch, to call anyone, but the radio was dead. No static, no sound. Only silence. And in that silence, the whispers returned. Low, distorted, overlapping. My own name, distorted into something monstrous, something alien. I covered my ears, screamed into the fog, begged for the world to be normal. But the fog pressed closer, damp and cold, curling around my legs and arms, pulling me forward, keeping me trapped. I stumbled down the street. The houses shifted again. Porches disappeared. Windows became doors. Mailboxes stretched and warped, tilting impossibly. And in the distance, the faint glow of what should have been the town's center. Familiar, yet wrong. The courthouse clock warped, ticking out a rhythm. The diner neon flickering letters I didn't recognize. The familiar streets I had walked countless times were gone, replaced by a liminal version of the town that didn't exist in reality. I stopped in the middle of the street, chest heaving. I could feel it then, an overwhelming weight, as if the town itself was aware of me, breathing me in, watching every motion, every thought. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry. My voice wouldn't come. And then I saw a movement behind me, or maybe it was in front. Hard to tell in this warped, impossible place. Figures in windows, on porches, along the foggy streets. Watching, waiting. Their presence was suffocating, pressing into me from every side. And still my heartbeat, loud, unnatural, echoing, carrying my fear with it like a beacon. I turned in a slow circle. Every time I faced a new direction, the town shifted slightly, houses warping, streetlights tilting, fog curling differently. Nothing remained constant. I realized then with cold clarity, I was not just trapped physically. I was trapped perceptually, mentally. The town itself had become a cage, shifting around me, bending reality, amplifying every fear, every thought, every heartbeat. I sank to the ground, hands shaking, tried to breathe, tried to tell myself it wasn't real, that I could leave, that I could find my way back to normal. But even that hope felt like a lie. The fog pressed closer. Figures watched from windows that shouldn't exist. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, curling toward me, and my heartbeat, louder now, echoing off invisible walls, pressing into my skull, told me the truth. I was alone, not just physically, not just in the streets, but completely, mentally, emotionally, trapped in a town that was mine and yet entirely foreign, surrounded by beings that weren't human, or perhaps were but had become something else entirely. My own heartbeat, the echo of it, the relentless reminder of life within a body that could not escape. It was all I had, and it was enough to terrify me beyond reason. I don't know how long I stayed there, on the warped street, crouched and shaking, listening to the unnatural rhythm of my own pulse. Minutes? Hours? Days? Time had ceased to exist. Every beat was a reminder of my isolation. Every whisper, every shifting house, every figure in the fog reinforced it. Alone, eventually, or perhaps not eventually, because time didn't exist in the same way. I forced myself up. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured. I moved through the town, tried to memorize anything that might serve as a guide, a way out. But the houses shifted as I walked. Familiar streets looped back. Windows disappeared and reappeared. Porches tilted. Shadows lengthened and contracted in impossible ways. And still my heartbeat echoed. And still the figures watched. And still I was alone. There was no dawn. There was no comfort. Only the warped, endless streets. The silent watchers. The fog curling around every corner. And the unnatural rhythm of my own heartbeat reverberating to the warped town that wasn't really mine. I realized then that this wasn't just a nightmare I could wake from. This was a reality I was trapped in, a liminal space that mirrored the town I knew, yet denied me any escape, any grounding, any sense of normalcy. And I understood, finally, that no matter how far I walked, no matter how fast I ran, the whispers, the fog, the watchers, and my own heartbeat would follow me. Alone, always alone,